And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
Paizo has had an influx of developers of late, so this is the first in what we intend to be a series of interviews aimed at getting to know Paizo's newest creative staff members. We've never heard of this first developer that we have on. He just came out of nowhere, just a man who emerged from the shadows to get this prestigious developer position. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Mr. Luis Loza. Luis, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
So who are you? Where did you come from? What are some of your credentials before you worked for Paizo?
Well, I have a few levels in Shadow Dancer, which is how I was able to stay in the shadows the whole time. Come out from there. I'm originally one of the freelancers. I've done a lot of work, especially on the player companion line in the last few years. And when the job posting went up last year, I figured, why not? And that why not soon became a, I guess I'm doing it. And here I am.
You are also a known blogger in the community.
Oh,
let's just get this out of the way. You work for... You're on the network.
I do a weekly blog currently for No Direction and the No Direction Network, which is a Monsters Physique blog where I make new monsters or stat up monsters from pop culture and get those up for both Starfinder and Pathfinder.
How many times between when you got hired and when you started working for Paizo did I double check that you were going to continue the blog and that this was okay with everybody?
4 or 5 times, I think.
That's it? All right. I feel like I was constantly asking, and a combination of not trusting the answer and not remembering the answer caused me to keep asking.
This is podcast-induced senility.
I just have so much information coming in that there's no room for it left anymore.
Now, if any of our listeners have read the blog or seen some of Luis's design credits, you know that he knows the system inside and out and has an incredible imagination. I look forward to his blog every single week because it often has me literally giggle and laugh out loud some of the critters you choose.
What is your decision-making process, by the way?
Well, usually what I try to do first and foremost is see if there's anything on the horizon that I could latch onto. Things like popular movies coming out or popular games coming out. Beyond that, then it's just whatever I end up liking, or if I discover a monster from mythology or something like that that I find interesting that we haven't yet already statted up in our countless bestiaries, then I decide to use one of those. But usually if it's, last year, at the end of last year, right around the new Star Wars movie, okay, that's an easy one. I can use that as a jumping off point and do a Star Wars monster. Things like that.
Can I guess this Friday's blog?
Sure.
Will it be Thanos?
No, it won't be Thanos because I fear I will mess it up so much that people will start arguing about Thanos isn't strong enough, or he's too strong, or he needs this or that. But it is along those lines.
Ooh. Along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to guess every 10 minutes I get a new guess.
Okay, that's fair.
But, by the time this podcast is probably out, it will be out, and they can read it.
Very excited. Oh, the blog post. I thought you meant the Avengers. Either way, I'm excited.
Oh, yes. Now, you started as a freelancer, was professionally, and now you're actually working on the very lines that you freelanced for. What was that transition like? What did you learn that you didn't know when you made that switch?
A lot of it I felt I ended up knowing, which is probably why I got hired. I think I've been told a few times that I understood most of the internal process already. There's just a lot of little teeny tiny styling and house style things that I wasn't aware of, that even some of them had changed only a few weeks before I started. So I was doing some things that at the time were right, and then I come in and oh no, we've changed those. Let's tweak this and that. But beyond that, all I feel the really important things in terms of design and formatting, things like that, were already kind of beaten into me by just doing them over and over and over for all my projects.
Now, I fear we kind of got a little ahead of ourselves. Could you explain, like, what is your position at Paizo and what exactly you do for them?
Oh, sure. I am one of the various people here who has the developer title. In my case, I'm working on the Pathfinder side of things, and in particular, I'm working on the softcover books, which are the player companions and the campaign setting books, and I'm sharing that with that responsibility with one of our other newly hired developers, Eleanor Ferrone, who got hired on and started about 2 weeks after I did. And between us two, we're basically tag teaming both of the lines together. So she, helps. We help cover each other's blind spots and things like that, and just kind of tag team both of the lines. So neither one of us is exactly like I'm the player companion and only I make the final decisions on player companion or campaign settings or whatever the case might be. We share those two together.
Can you give an idea of what the different blind spots are? So if we pick up a book, what's most likely to be the Louis contribution versus the Eleanor contribution?
I feel more comfortable with the rules side of things and all of that, like understanding the rules language and mechanics and how that all comes together. And not to say that Eleanor doesn't have a good grasp on that either, but I usually focus more on that. Eleanor, I feel, has a lot better grasp of the English language in general, so prose and things like that, and just general writing that isn't all this technical writing for the rules and whatnot. She covers that a lot better, so she'll end up asking questions or pointing things out that I didn't even think of because I'm just that rules mindset, and I know exactly how the rules have to be, but wait, what about this line here? It doesn't make sense, or we need to switch this around, or we forgot to mention this from earlier, and oh yes, of course, because she's a lot better there, I feel. So that's what I feel is one of my blind spots, at least.
You mentioned the rules. I know a lot of people were curious just how much more first edition content we're going to get from Paizo for Pathfinder. And it seems like the player companion line is the main source of that. Is that going to continue for how long will that continue? Well,
for sure, I know the player companion is going up right until the very end. I think I don't know for sure. We don't have the 2019 schedule in place yet. To the best of my knowledge, like right up until Gen Con, we are putting out player companions and campaign setting books. I don't believe we have officially decided on what the state of those lines, if they're changing at all, or if they're getting tweaked, or what the case might be there for second edition. But you can expect all the same, volume of content that you've been getting all these months, right up until first edition is. The doors close on first edition.
And that's a really interesting time to be organizing a product line, is at the tail end of basically that product line's existence. I mean, it might still exist in Pathfinder 2e moving forward or not, but as far as Pathfinder first edition campaign settings and player companions, right at that Gen Con, this is its last hurrah. So what is it like heading the ship for that last hurrah, and what should our listeners be excited about that will be making it right under the wire?
I think it's a really fun position to be in because I feel like I'm sneaking in those last few things that I was hoping to see in the game right before the door gets closed. And a lot of people, I feel, are looking towards the future at second edition, which means it's easy to sneak in and surprise people with look at this exciting thing that we're still doing in first edition that you weren't even paying attention, and now here it is. That's kind of how I felt when we announced the upcoming martial arts handbook, which I thought, this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to doing this book or something like it, someday in the future. Now here I am as a developer and actually get to spearhead that and put it out into the world.
Martial Arts Handbook isn't the first one that's coming out of the books you've developed, but it is probably the one I'm most excited about of the list of the immediate future. Do you mind if we dive into that one first?
Let's do it.
All right, let's talk about martial arts. So it seems like in Pathfinder, after Ultimate Combat, the style feats were kind of, this is what martial arts are in Pathfinder, in the role-playing game. Is this going to follow that trend?
There will be some style feats. I think it's kind of impossible to make a book like this and not have some kind of style feats or mechanics that interact with style feats in some way. But beyond that, we've outlined this book, and when Eleanor and I were putting that together, a big thing we were trying to do is just explain that martial arts are more than just some feats, and start touching on things like archetypes that are tied directly into the setting. And it might be like, this particular martial arts style is from such and such a place in Galarian, and let's talk about it and elevate it now into something that's just a few words on a page. Now it's a whole archetype that you can play as, or a chain of feats that you can take that aren't necessarily style feats. So you don't necessarily have to buy into all three of them. You might just do one or two, and then we're good to go with whatever style or martial art that you want.
What is the balance between rules based on real-world martial arts and completely invented martial arts?
I think the balance is a lot of what we have outlined, and again, this might not end up making the final cut, but what we're looking forward to with that is taking a lot of inspiration from real world and then just giving it that nice Galarian twist and bit of flavor to make it into something that feels like it's part of Galarian, but it's kind of recognizable as an analog to an existing martial art.
Okay. And is there any ground up, this is just a brand new Luis Loza original martial art?
I think there's a handful of those that we're just going to make this thing, put it in because it's cool. Let's go.
Now,
Qigong. Go ahead, Barb.
You mentioned that this was a good opportunity to get in the things that the last few things you think the game needs. Is there anything in that book you'd like to call out as an example of that? Like, this is something that the game's needed, and this is a good last chance to get it in there.
I don't know how much I can say.
Okay.
It's very hard to speak in vague terms with that. There are some archetypes that I personally, made sure that were on the outline, that I'm looking forward to, that I could definitely speak more with the fan base, or people in the Discord, or whatever the case might be, once they're out there. I've also made sure, and Eleanor and I have been doing that, and a lot of the team also comes together to first decide what could be in these books, and some of those also come in from everyone else, other developers and managers and things like that. So it's not just me and Eleanor that are slipping in to make our book that we want, but we've been putting some of those in through some of the other player companions as well.
Okay. Now, you couldn't mention too much about this book. I can understand because it's an outline. But what about one of the books that you can speak to that about? Is there anything close or recently released where you can point to, aha, see, this is what we thought were needed?
There is... None of the books I've worked on development-wise have come out just yet. The first one is actually coming out next month, which is our Blood of the Ancients player companion. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because I came in when I didn't get to help outline that. But I did tweak those, one, mechanically to make the sense that we need for the game, but also kind of work how I think things should work. There's an archetype coming up in Blood of the Ancients that has some unarmed combat associated with it, and I tweaked that a bit, and it's related to the Magus, and I think it's going to be something that people like. Hopefully, we'll see. So
I am surprised it took this long to have an unarmed combat Magus. It feels like deliver touch spells. Why not just do it with a good solid punch? Like, why hasn't that existed before now?
There is actually one called the Esoteric, which is in Occult Adventures, which I had to look at when I was developing this other one. So that's one thing I have to do as a developer, is see what we've already done and then make sure we don't cover the same old ground. So this one, the Esoteric does that. It does spell strikes with unarmed combat. This other one does it as well, but there's a big part of that archetype, and it's weapon choice. That hopefully you'll see once that comes out and understand what I'm talking about. That really puts it in a completely different direction than the other archetype.
Entitled Blood of the Ancients. Ancients is a little more vague than most of the Blood of books. So what does this cover?
This covers the ancient heritages to kingdoms and civilizations of Galarian's past. Things like the Jistka Imperium, which has risen and fallen, ancient Assyrian, Thassalon, all of those ancient civilizations that you've heard about plenty of times, and we say, yeah, things happened and they had an influence on the world, but you don't really see it much. There are people who still have characters and NPCs and whatnot that have ties to that. Obviously, things like Thassalon, there are obvious ties, but you never hear about the dwarves that were part of that direct lineage that was part of the quest for Sky, and we talk about things like that in this book.
Ooh, do you get the Craft MacGuffin feat in this book?
We don't have that yet, but there's still a few more books, so I might be able to slip it in.
The Blood of line was very popular, but I know it's also had a couple of unpopular entries in it, probably because it's such a popular subline. What do you know about the books that have come before it, and what has been learned from what were popular versus the ones that people thought were misses?
Well, I think what it comes down to is first expectations with the kind of content that's put in there. So you talk about a book like Blood of the Elements, which from my understanding didn't go down as well as something like Blood of the Moon or Blood of the Angels or things like that. And part of it might just be, you come into a player companion book expecting certain types of content like archetypes, feats, magic items, spells, all the typical player fare, and then you end up seeing some pages that aren't solely dedicated to giving you that kind of content. It might not be, you might feel like you're not getting your money's worth out of a book like that. So I think one of the big things that, especially now with the newer outlines, we're trying to push is just making sure you're cramming this with as much player content as possible. This is the player companion book. There's a whole nother line of books if you want setting material. So we'll just give you what you want here, and you can look elsewhere if you want to expand your knowledge of the world.
I remember when Logan Bonner was on talking about Ultimate Intrigue, he said that after, later into development, they realized that they just didn't have any Blood Rage or spells, and this was the only spell list that didn't get added. You don't have the same page count as a hardcover book, so how do you make sure that, let's say, over a couple of releases, you've hit on the myriad of options that you have to have some kind of support for?
Well, one thing that we do is we try to, first and foremost, hit the obvious classes. So things like Martial Arts Handbook will feature things like monks and brawlers. And those obvious ones that usually can just safely set aside and not even think about, and eventually some content will find its way there. But one thing I like to try to do in our meetings where we first start getting these ideas for these books is intentionally do a checklist in my head of, I want to make sure I throw out an idea for every single class that's in the game, which at this point is 30 plus classes. So, and sometimes it leads to off-the-wall ideas. So, in Martial Arts Handbook, for example, it could be a wizard that punches things.
Yes.
Not to say that that's in there, but that's one of the ideas that we end up throwing out, and we try to make sure of that. And then another thing is we try our best, because there's so many classes at this point, is to just move on from a class once it's been given a little bit of content. So if we give you a new set of monk options, okay, we touched the monk, let's cross that off our list and just try to go down the line and give as much to everyone else. And then if there's any space left for anything, then we can start doubling up or adding more content for things that already have the content there in the book.
If there's a class or an option that's not popular, do you tend to try and fix it and make it more popular, or do you kind of cut your losses because there's just other areas that people would rather see support for?
I can say that what we try to do is not fix it, because it's not our job to fix the classes in Player Companion. So if there's some recent class that you didn't like, there's not going to be a complete rewrite of that class in these Player Companions. So what we try to do is give interesting options to those classes that are there to hopefully give you that feeling of, oh, maybe I should give this class another look because I just saw this archetype or this set of feats that make this interesting. Maybe it might be worth playing that class that I had already decided I'm never going to touch again.
Now you say
I wasn't
that
trying to trap you there, by the way. I wasn't. I literally meant the popular classes, not classes that are broken and that you're going to fix them.
Oh no, it's fine.
Well, you do say that, and I'm absolutely sure you're honest about the intention, but it has been done in the past. I mean, the most famous example is probably Fencing Grace that fixes Swashbuckler.
Sure, but that's up to the design team to decide that, okay, it's time to go back to the drawing board or tweak things here and there. I as much as I'd like to, I feel like I shouldn't be wielding the power to say, hey, let's rip this all out of an existing class and then put it back in and all fixed now and say, here you go.
With 1E winding down, is there as much oversight over what you're doing?
I'd say there's just as much oversight as there's ever been, but I can't say for sure because I don't know what it was like beforehand. I feel like I've been given the same liberty that anyone else that I see, even with like the Starfinder team. They don't have to worry about an upcoming edition. They have the same oversight that I'm getting there, which I think I'm trusted to do good work here. Whenever we finish our outlines, we hand them off to Adam. He's our manager, Adam Daigle, and he looks them over and gives us notes or gives the okay on those. So it's not like I'm just sneaking things under the radar and laughing when I get home because they didn't notice that I put in my favorite class's archetype that buffs it 6 times over.
I wasn't thinking so much that you were trying to get things past people as much as the radar is vaguer now. Like the gloves are off, so if you have an experimental idea, there's a better chance that it actually gets into the game.
I think the team here at Paizo is more than happy to try experimental ideas whenever they see fit, as long as it isn't something that eats up, all of our page count, for example. But if it's, hey, I want to try this really weird, wacky idea for an Arcanist archetype, for example, that would completely get rid of spellcasting, but then give them who knows what. I'm sure I could do that. I'm sure I could do that in the player companions, and just know that, okay, I'm going to do this idea, but it's up to me to make sure, 1, that it's balanced, 2, that it all makes sense, and 3, that it doesn't completely dominate the page count of the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Arcanist is an interesting point. Have you ever had to do, as you're going down your list of classes, how often do you get to a class that's just like, well, darn it, what in the world can we do for this class? Like, is there harder classes or themes than others?
I think they all end up being equally hard depending on which book's theme that we're working with. So something like martial arts, I'm sure I would have a lot harder time to figure out some Arcanist exploits that deal with punches and kicks than I would deciding, in Blood of the Ancients, let's tie this back to Ancient Thassalon and come up with rune-themed exploits, for example. That could be a thing that would work a lot easier with the Arcanist, but then I would have a lot more trouble with coming up with something like the Vigilantes thing, like that would be tied to an ancient bloodline. So it really depends on what theme we're working with. They've all been equally as easy or as hard on different books.
Is there like a calling or an imperative to bring more content to recently released classes, such as, say, the Shapeshifter that doesn't have a lot of options yet?
There hasn't been, an order from on high that says, get more stuff for the Shifter, get more stuff for the occult classes, anything like that. But seeing as we know that 2nd edition is on its way, we're doing our best to give as much content to those classes that aren't going to be in the playtest as possible, just because we don't want someone to feel like, they're doing a new edition. I guess no one cares about the Kineticists anymore, and we'll never see Kineticist talents ever again. That's not going to be the case.
No, don't abandon Yoon.
Yoon is getting plenty of love until right in the end of first edition, so should be happy with that, I hope.
Shoot, I had a question. Kind of my job here. I'm letting myself and everyone else down. I'm sorry, guys.
So we talked a lot about the player's companion line. What about the campaign setting line? What's there to get excited about over on that side of the fence?
Well, what have we recently announced? Is there anything you want to ask about there?
All right. So the first one in the book coming up right up is the mid-June release, Distant Realms. Get me excited about Distant Realms, Luis.
Distant Realms was the very first book that I started developing that is now done. So that was really exciting, and also kind of a trial, I think, just showing up on day one. It's like, here you go, here's this big book, good luck. It wasn't the case like that, but it sure felt like that because it was my first new day. But I really like Distant Realms. I did some freelancing a while back for a book called Heaven Unleashed, which dealt with a lot of celestial stuff. And then coming back here, and we talk about a city in heaven, and I thought, oh man, I get to kind of see what else is happening in heaven, and with the upcoming planar adventures, learning all that. So there's a lot of interesting little things in these entries for all the 6 cities that we're doing here that I think are great hooks. If you've ever looked at our Distant Shores campaign setting book, it's in a similar style where we branched out beyond the inner sea and talked about different cities outside of the inner sea. Now we're just doing that beyond the material plane. So there's lots of interesting things. And I really recommend it. Also, it's a great companion piece to Planar Adventures once that's out.
You mentioned the city in heaven, but you didn't mention what I think is much more interesting, the settlements in the fiery depths of hell.
Yep.
I like that they're settlements. It's not just like souls being shoved into a cage, that these people have actually built some kind of civilization.
Well, settlement, I think it implies a bit that might not be there with a city in hell. I mean, hell has it has a city built by devils for an archdevil. So it's great for if you're a devil or a fiend of some kind. If you go visit there, you probably don't want to stay there very long.
They don't change your towels every night?
No, they tend to give you the soggy towels, and that's if you're lucky.
Oh, that is the worst thing I can imagine. I don't want to go to hell after all. The campaign setting line isn't... The campaign setting for Pathfinder is continuing into 2nd edition without any kind of reboot or anything. So,
correct.
How are you approaching the campaign setting line different from how you're approaching the player companion line?
Beyond the mechanical aspects where we sneak in feats or spells or whatever the case might be, the word is we're just keeping this going. We got to make sure we line up with existing continuity and canon, move it forward and evolve it as well. And we're not really expecting to make any serious shifts, so we're just doing our best to make sure this is all really easily readable, and in doing so should be quickly transplanted over to 2nd edition rules for whatever you need. But because it's just setting material and history and background and flavor and all that, it should be really easy to transfer that over.
Are there any areas of the campaign setting that you are excited to explore?
Yes, in upcoming unannounced products.
Okay.
Now, speaking of the exact opposite of that, of a very much announced and very well explored area of Galarian, the next upcoming campaign setting book is first oversized and about Sandpoint, the very first location of Pathfinder.
Yep.
What gives with this book? What's up with it?
Well, I haven't. I'll just be frank here. I didn't actually have much to do with this book, and it was actually developed by someone else. It was developed by Adam Daigle, but I have looked at it. I kind of understand what's going on there. But from what I know, James Jacobs, it's his pet town. I mean, it's where everyone started their first Pathfinder adventure, and it's such an iconic town that we needed to go back and look at it. Especially with the upcoming Return of the Rune Lords, it's the perfect time to take a peek at what's been going on there, and bring everyone up to speed with the events as or the town as it stands now. And it's also the best chance for James to kind of answer all of those questions that he left open for years and years and years, and of course open up new questions and new mysteries there. It's big because, I mean, how much have we known about Sandpoint over the years? And I'm sure he's built up so much backstory in his head and everything that he just needs 96 pages worth, which I'm sure is not even close to enough. We're going to put in lots of maps in there as well, and hopefully stat up most of the NPCs. So this city is, or this town, Sandpoint is going to be about as the most complete town you can ever have in a product at this point.
Yeah, he's saying here that he wrote the entire book, and we're talking about James Jacobs, and that he will be including stat blocks for every named NPC in Sandpoint.
Yep.
Wow. That's an ambitious, and I have a lot of very fond memories of Sandpoint, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners do, because Rise of the Rune Lords was such a prolific adventure. Then you had Shattered Star, which didn't do a lot in Sandpoint, but I mean, there's Jade Regent, We Be Goblins, the adventure card game was based on Rise of the Rune Lords, and gosh, so how much Sandpoint is there in the world?
Yeah. Other than Absalom, I think it's our most iconic city in all of the setting at this point. So it makes perfect sense to give it its own campaign setting book.
Another campaign setting book you worked on is the Construct Builder's Guidebook.
Yes.
I got to ask, why is this a campaign setting book?
Mostly because we want to leave the decision making about constructs and introducing them to a game in the GM's hand. There have been options here and there in like player companions and other books that occasionally allow you to get a construct buddy or homunculus buddy or something along those lines. But beyond that, most of that power is in the GM's hand, especially considering that this book is going to have a sizable bestiary with new constructs. So that's plenty of just new foes for your GM to throw at you.
So it's in the GM's hand, but I'd imagine this is still mostly a mechanical book, right?
Yeah, there's plenty of mechanics. There's archetypes. There's magic items in there as well. So plenty that players can also nibble on. If their GM doesn't want to let them play with the whole thing, there's here's this little section for you. Have some archetypes. Have some magic items.
Now, I know this one's only coming out in November, so it's probably not that far along in development. You don't know exactly what's going to make it in.
No, actually, there was a long story to it, but long story short, there was some delays with the development there. We've actually gotten there to about, we'll say, the last 10% of the book where it needs the final pass with editing and whatnot before it's completely done. And I've developed a good chunk of it. Adam Daigle and Eleanor and I have all tackled the development of that book, so it's fully developed. It's just about ready to go. So I don't know if it, with the printing time and whatnot, if it's still going to meet the November deadline. But in the comments there, we've mentioned that that's actually just a placeholder date. It could be that it's actually bumped up and comes out sooner. I can't say for sure. It really depends on how that whole process works out. But that's an interesting book because I actually ended up freelancing for that book before I applied for Paizo, and then in turn had to go into that book and work on it and look at my own work.
Which, of course, was perfect and required no edits, right?
That's what I've been told. I didn't develop my section, so...
Can I ask a few questions about what's going to be included? They can even be yes, no, or can't say questions.
Okay, sure.
All right. Vehicles that transform into constructs.
Something along those lines is there.
Ooh. All right.
Okay.
Let's go a step further. Multiple constructs that can form into one larger construct.
Not as much, I'm sorry.
Oh, my Constructicons. Wearable constructs.
We've had those actually in Ultimate Magic already.
Yeah.
There's some modifications for constructs there, and one of them is lets you suit it up. So that's already there if you want that.
All right. I see it's got familiar constructs, or something about familiars is in the description.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
There is at least one construct that you can take as a familiar.
All right, that's fair. Let's see. I think that's all of my questions. The fact that there's transforming constructs in there makes me very happy.
I'm just curious as what vehicle could be. I mean, Pathfinder has a few quote-unquote vehicles, but we're still dealing with a mostly fantasy.
I didn't say it's directly a vehicle. I said there's something like that. So
okay.
I want to temper those expectations.
I'm sitting here
thinking
thinking
trucks. Some of them turn into halberds.
I'm sitting here thinking, like, if it's a construct that turns into a boat, this has limited application of use.
Is there a huge construct that turns into a pistol that's sized for a medium creature?
No, I'm sorry.
That's too specific, I understand.
Yeah.
But there's still time for Construct Builder's Guide 2.
Could be. I don't know. I mean, we could retouch any of these books that we've already done in 2nd edition in some form. I don't know. That's in the future.
Okay, now moving on to the campaign setting with a cover most likely to be featured on the side of a van. What can you tell me about Faiths of Golarion?
Faiths of Golarion. Luckily, that just got announced a few hours before I came on here, which is great. That cover artwork is actually pretty close to the final artwork, and it's one of the books that Eleanor and I have been most excited about because it gives us an opportunity to branch out outside of the Inner Sea region. Not to say that we don't like the Inner Sea region, but I personally feel that a lot of places beyond the Inner Sea have been left untouched for too long, so this is our first step towards hopefully putting more content out that covers that. So if you've ever looked at Inner Sea Face, or even more likely Inner Sea Gods, where we cover a particular god, their faith, aphorisms, holidays, priesthood, things like that, over 6 to 8 pages. This is just another one of those books. We're covering 10 gods that feature a lot that are beyond the Inner Sea there.
Now, on the cover, who are we looking at? Which gods or faiths do these represent?
So the human man with the wings is a god from Vudra named Gruhasta. The gnome is the goddess Nibi Ramodazzle. And
nice.
The Tengu god is Heifeng from Tianxia.
Ooh.
So why does the game need more gods?
Well, if you're talking on a mechanical side, sometimes there's just not a perfect combination of domains or subdomains that you want for your cleric, and some people just need that exact specification of perfect combo for their build or for their character. In terms of flavor, though, a god really informs a lot about a culture that worships it. So, think about Sarenrae, how she's worshipped in so many countries, but not only that, then some countries or some groups of people worship her in different ways than others, so that is already just an easy way to determine what kind of culture you might expect. So if their worshippers of Sarenrae, you might expect people that are truthful and honest and good people, and they might be great at combat because of the prowess with the scimitar and fire, or great healers. And if you go to a country where their main god of worship is Zon-Kuthon, you probably are getting the complete opposite of that and might not want to stay around for very long. And along with that, because we're also branching out from the Inner Sea, it also gives us a chance to start talking just a little tiny bit about the regions where these gods are worshipped. So, Vudra we haven't touched on very much, so now we can say, hey, this is Gruhasta, these are the kind of people that worship him, and also these are the kind of places where his worship is very common, and we can talk just a little bit about that, and hopefully plant some seeds for the future, and also get people interested in those locations, and hopefully draw more attention in those locations.
I see you've got a halfling god of luck and a gnome god of gambling.
Yep.
They must hate each other, right?
No, not necessarily.
Think about gambling, and then if you've got one guy that's tampering with luck.
If you're talking about Chaldira, the halfling god, she tends to be more on the side of playful luck and winning games, and that where no one ends up getting hurt or losing anything out of it. So if you try to use her luck and the abilities that she would bestow you, and then try to scam someone out of their money, that's no good, and Chaldira won't approve of that.
And that's
Right.
when the
And I take it
alignment
back.
gets into things. Now, a lot of times, you guys pull from a lot of real world cultures that don't often make it into traditional fantasy literature, and this seems like a great opportunity to do that. Are there any cultures or mythologies that you pulled on in order to integrate them into this book?
There are, but they're not. None of them are direct analogs. Like if you think of Lamashtu, how she comes from a direct analog in the real world, we don't have anyone in this upcoming book that would be in the same vein as her. But we do pull, ideologies and traditions and ideas from other religions and mix and match to work for the god, and also come up with new things that are inspired by real world religions and mythology to make these unique gods.
Now, this is a
You know
good...
what, Ferrum?
Huh?
We never actually mentioned that people in chat can feel free to ask questions about any of these products that we're talking about.
Exactly. We are filmed every week in front of a live Twitch audience. If you've got any questions for us, please get them in chat. We'll be going throughout the chat and collecting the questions and asking them during the episode.
And just to remind people of the books we've talked about so far and the other ones that Luis has worked on, the list is Player Companion Blood of the Ancients, Player Companion Heroes from the Fringe, which we haven't talked about yet. We'll probably talk about that next. Player's Companion Plane Hopper's Handbook, Player Companion Martial Arts Handbook, Campaign Setting Distant Realms, and Campaign Setting Construct Builder's Guide, and now Campaign Setting Faiths of Galarian. Luis, Heroes from the Fringe. Where is the Fringe? What are the heroes like?
Well, the fringe refers to anything that isn't the typical group of a particular race or group of people that you think of when you think of like an elf or a dwarf or a halfling or anything like that. So we've talked about lots of these little pocket groups that exist throughout Galarian, and they might not even be pocket groups. They might actually be large groups. So we're kind of focused on the inner sea. And this is our chance to start talking about some of these other groups beyond the typical ones that always get talked about. So things like the Comet Dwarves. We have our dwarves, and you always hear about them underground or up in the Five Kings Mountains. Here, let's look at these dwarves in the desert. Or we have, in our Distant Shores book a while back, we talked about Sagada over in Arcadia. We can talk about the halflings and gnomes that are mentioned there in a book like this.
This actually was a book that was not on my radar, but I am very excited by that premise.
The cover, is that those are a Varisian wagon on the cover?
Yeah, I think that's a placeholder cover.
Okay. Because we know a lot about Varisia.
Yeah. Most of these books have their placeholder cover still at this point.
About how long
Was
is
this?
Sorry. That's something
go
we've
ahead.
never really talked about on this show. How long is it before you guys get final covers? Because usually these books are sent to the printers like 6 months before we even see them.
So, from what I've gathered here, just with my experience, one of the first things we try to do after outlining the book is put in the order for the art cover, just because those can take a while because they're a lot bigger piece of art. And sometimes, like in the case of Faiths of Galarian, we sometimes need that cover art to inform art in the future. With Faiths of Galarian, a lot of these gods have never had any kind of art before, and we had to codify, one, who was on the cover, and two, what they look like, pretty much right away, because then later on, when it comes time to do the internal artwork, now we know, oh, this is what Nivi Rambodazzle looks like, this is what Hei Feng looks like, and we can make sure that matches with the cover, and we don't have two conflicting appearances of a god. So that tends to come in pretty early. Sometimes, during our development of the turnovers is when we get those. Sometimes we get the sketches around that time, but those tend to be the first pieces of art that we get, because usually we don't order the rest of the art until we have our book developed and our turnovers in, because we don't know what has been written, so we don't know what to ask for in the art orders.
What kind of input do you have on the art orders?
Eleanor and I put in the art orders for our own book, so we get to decide what kind of art orders we ask for.
Very cool. What's some of the art that you've seen that's very exciting?
The most excited I got most recently was to see the face of Galarian cover. Another thing that I've seen recently is for some of the artwork in Blood of the Ancients. For example, that Magus archetype that I was referencing has a pretty cool piece of art that I hope people like.
I guess we're a few months away from seeing that ourselves. Actually, I guess we get to see the faiths of Galarian, so that's cool that we get to share in your joy for that.
Yeah.
So you don't just get to describe what's on a cover, you get to design the look of a god. That must be a different kind of thrill than you're used to.
Yeah, it's very exciting when we came to realize that, because of the nature of who we're picking for these gods, and the fact that a lot of them haven't really had any kind of in-depth information, we're deciding what these look like and informing a lot of decisions, both visually and then in terms of what this god could be in terms of their, the religion itself, based on just an appearance. So, for example, Nivi Rambodazzle has her dice in her hand, and those dice are a key element to a worshiper of Nivi, and that's there because we decided she has some dice that she's holding on to.
Is she supposed to be a bleachling, or is she more of a is she silver-skinned?
She's bleached.
But the bleachlings they're dead inside. She looks like she's already got, like she's up to something.
There's a whole story there, which you'll get to see once that book comes out.
Well, then I will see what that story is. Let's see. Param, are you ready to move on to the last book on our list that Luis has worked on?
Yes, what is?
All right, the Plane Hopper's Handbook. One of the early things I knew about that is that this is the book for people that were hoping for more crunch in the hardcover Plane book that's coming out, the name of which, Planar Adventures?
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you tell us about Plane Hopper's Handbook, and why is it getting the crunch that the Planar Adventures is not?
Planar Adventures is, with the more recent changes with our hardcover books and being okay with fitting in more Galarian flavor, as you've seen with like Adventurer's Guide and Ultimate Wilderness, it has a lot of work to do to talk about all of the major planes, which ends up using a lot of that space, which is great information for a GM. There's a good chunk of player options available there, but with any of these books like Occult Adventures or Advanced Class Guide, we always come out with a companion book for just even more player options to expand on what's in there. So it makes sense that we would have another planar book to go with the big planar hardcover.
Are those dire flumps on the cover? What am I looking at here?
I think those are flumps from a piece of art from Distant Worlds, because I think that's when Kyra is on a spaceship at some point.
We need more flumps in the world.
Do we?
Yes, we
I
do.
think Adam Dago would agree with you.
Flumps appear in peripheral products and in joke products and stuff. I want to see flumps in adventures. I know that you have no say in this whatsoever, Luis. But I just think like they're a joke and they're kind of funny and they did a really good job with Misfit Monsters Redeemed and like making them make a lot more sense. But man, I want to see the motivations of a flump. I want to know a flump's name.
Bard Wannabe says we need a flump god. I'm guessing that we won't be getting a flump in Fates of Galarian.
You caught me just a bit too late to sneak that in. I'm sorry.
No. No.
I'm not sorry, but apparently Bard Wannabe and Paramar.
Yes, very sorry.
So I got to be honest. I've mentioned this on the show before. I really don't care about other planes. So can you sell me on Plane Hopper's Handbook?
I sure hope that I can, because it's my job relies on me being able to sell you on that. So Plane Hopper's Handbook, just because it has planes in the name doesn't necessarily mean it's about strictly about going to other planes and whatnot. That is a big theme there. It's, how do I get around the planes? How do I keep myself safe while I'm getting around the planes? But if you think about like the tiefling who has the heritage drawn from a fiend from a plane like hell, that could be the kind of influence we're looking here as well with some of the player options, where you might have that bit of a planar touch to your abilities or to your feet or whatever the case might be, that you can keep for yourself while on the material plane. So you can draw the power from the planes while still doing your normal adventuring in somewhere like Galarian.
All right. You've done a good job.
Thank you.
Not having to worry about going to other planes, that I can bring the planes to me. Well, that's...
Yeah, there's a good chunk of that.
All right. Plane is a power source. I can get on board with that.
Mm-hmm.
Param, you like planes, don't you?
I do like planes, and I like a lot of the influence they can bring. I especially like it when you're going to a plane and they have detailed like a city on that plane or a community there. Because if you just think of something like the plane of water, the last thing I want to think about is just, oh, it's blue and wet everywhere. There has to be something interesting, and Pathfinder Society has really done a lot to sell me on that, because there's been a lot of planar locations where you do get to see a community. I mean, and I guess a lot of it is like the old games, like Planescape Torment also taught me to appreciate that going a little far out there can help bring a little bit special to your game, especially when you need to spice things up from the traditional dragons and ogres and castles.
Yeah. But there's also already a bunch of crazy stuff.
I mean, after 20 years of doing this, the bar of the word crazy raises a little bit.
All right, so Luis, we've gone over all the books that are announced. Mm-hmm. Is there any... I know that you recently were looking for different ideas for areas of the game that could still be supported. Were there any interesting ideas from the suggestions that you farmed that you weren't expecting?
There were, and I still have plans for those.
Okay.
Because a lot of these books kind of were already on the schedule when I showed up. So it's just a matter of me, then taking them and giving it my influence, and Eleanor giving it her touch as well for these books, and deciding what these are going to be. So Martial Arts Handbook was on schedule, and by the time I saw it when I first showed up, I was like, I was very excited for it, and was hoping to do something. But we're now reaching the point where I can, or we can start suggesting new things based on some of the ideas that are being thrown out or that I already had coming in here.
So when you are going to pitch a new idea, how much preparation do you have to make? Like, how fleshed out does the idea have to be before you can even get into the actual development of the idea?
Well, recently what we've been doing is just kind of going around and asking everyone that has ideas for a possible, like a player companion or a campaign setting, to just submit all of those ideas. And then Adam Daigle and Amanda Hammond-Coons have been narrowing those down to the ones that we are actually going to work with. So there was a recent meeting where I had suggested something, and that helped influence the final product that we decided upon for the next player companion after martial arts. Nice. And that was very easy. It was me putting all the information of what I thought could go into a book that I had pitched into an email, and then just sending it off to Adam, and then later finding out, okay, that's the one we're doing.
Cool. I know at one point Paizo was trying to keep up with, was trying to support adventure paths as they come out, but more recently we've seen books that fit into an adventure path that came out in the recent past. I don't know if that's something that's being deliberately done, but is that something that you can mine for ideas for future Pathfinder player player companion books.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing we've been doing is looking back at our previous releases of just other rule books or setting books or player companions, because this is our last chance to talk about some of the things or work with some of the mechanics that exist in first edition. And that's very much informing the kind of things that we're trying to put into these player companions as well.
I have a question that I need to explain an elaborate wrestling reference. Are you ready for it?
All right. I'll see if I can.
So in the WCW writers' room, whenever they were stalled, whenever they hit a writer's block, one of them would always pitch the Invisible Champion. And it would be a year-long storyline where an invisible wrestler, so a non-wrestler, won the championship. And this was how they fueled getting a terrible idea out of the way to get good ideas. Sure. Do you have any similar process when you're trying to come up with new ideas?
I think when we do our meetings, where we first pitch all the possible ideas of what we can put into the next outline, is when we get that out of the way. Because I've thrown out ideas that I came up with a thing and I'm going to say it, and we're going to write it on the board and hope that it survives later on when I look it over again and decide, oh no, that's not very good. So there's been a lot of those where we're throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks, and then based on what does stick, then we also get to choose, no, this is the better piece, and this is the better piece. This is what's going in the actual outline.
Are there any pieces that were just notoriously bad at sticking?
There's nothing that's been notoriously bad at sticking from what I've seen so far, but one thing I pitched is something that has been tossed multiple times and hasn't really made the cut just yet.
Mm-hmm. Chat's been rather quiet. So
come on, chat.
We need some more questions, chat.
All right, well, while we're ready to wrap up, because we have been talking to you for an hour now, why don't we talk about your PaizoCon plans? This is your first PaizoCon as a Paizo employee. What are you looking forward to? How is it going to be different for you this year?
Well, first, I have to work while I'm there. This is, we actually recently had a get-together to kind of talk about what the whole PaizoCon process entails as an employee, because there's a lot of new people here. So I'm going to be running a few games that hopefully when the lottery goes up very soon, you'll get a chance to sign up for. I won't say exactly what the game is, but it is porting over an older adventure to the Pathfinder playtest, so hopefully that gets people excited to sign up for that. And then I got a few panels that I'm going to do, which I'm not entirely sure which I'm doing. People just asked me if I wanted to be on panels. We'll see which ones I end up on. And then just going around and being another blue shirt that you can talk to.
Do you have any tips for keeping up your enthusiasm, energy level, and awakenedness?
I've always been told there's that 3-2-1 rule where you always want to try to get at least 3 hours of sleep, 2 meals a day, and 1 shower a day. I suggest to take it easy because PaizoCon is completely different from a really big con like Gen Con. I haven't been to Gen Con, but I've been to something like PAX, which is just completely filled to the brim with people. And just it's a very relaxed atmosphere. If you've got a room in the hotel or nearby, don't hesitate to just take a break and relax if you want. That's something I did over the years that I've been doing PaizoCon, just not expecting to be doing something at every minute of the con, because that's not the kind of con it is. It's very personal, small, and easygoing.
If somebody wants to strike up a conversation with you, what are some topics that you like to talk about outside, or actually both inside and outside the scope of Pathfinder and Paizo?
Well, I kind of have to talk about everything about Pathfinder now because I have to know so much of it.
But if somebody just wants to talk to you and they want to bring a topic that they know you're going to enjoy talking about.
Well, if Martial Arts Handbook was any kind of indicator, I like monks. I tend to like the more martial type of characters, so if you want to talk about character stuff, I talk monks, fighters, those all day. I also like the adventures. I've run so many adventure paths, I'd be happy to talk about things like the Hell's Rebel adventure path, or the Legacy of Fire, or Kingmaker, or I'm trying to remember, Iron Gods. Those are some of the ones I've run. And outside of that, if we're talking outside of Pathfinder, I'm big into video games, if you've noticed from looking at all the monsters I started up on the blog. And things like more recent fighting games like Street Fighter are a big thing. It's an interesting connection that I would like a game like Street Fighter and be into monks. Stuff like that. Going into big pop culture things like Marvel movies is always good. Or just, talk about the weather. I'm willing to try to make small talk, and we'll figure out what we can talk about. Doesn't matter.
Is there any Street Fighter influence in martial arts of Galarian? No, the Martial Arts Handbook?
Yes. And
Nice.
that's not the only game that's getting some influence in there, but I have to be very careful to not directly make something from a game or from an anime that I've seen and put it in there.
You have like an option to throw a spear at a guy, say, come here, and then you get to drag him from a distance.
Maybe not exactly like that.
No, yeah, that was an example of the kind of thing you can't do.
Yeah, that's exactly.
We do have a couple of questions from chat.
Great.
Justin Sluter. Speaking of PaizoCon, Justin is a standby of PaizoCon. I believe he's been to every PaizoCon I've been to, and more. He says, Louise, what are your 3 favorite nations of the Inner Sea region?
Ooh, I really like Varisia. I really like Katapesh. And what would be a third one that I like a lot? I would say Numeria. Those are probably my top 3.
And Bard Wannabe wants to know, what god do you most like playing Divine Casters of? Or, if you want to get specific, the gods from the Faith of Galarian that you would be most likely to play a Divine Caster of.
Sneaky there. So, with gods, I think my favorite god so far, and still has been for a very long time, is Sarenrae. I just dig everything that she's about quite a bit. In Face of Galarian, I really like what Gruhasta is about, so you should be able to see that once the book is out. And there's another god from a different continent that I'm very much liking as well, for how they're shaping up in development.
Who we'll know more about when the book comes out.
Yep.
And finally, Bastille wants to know, does the Martial Arts Handbook have or utilize fighting stances?
It doesn't have any direct stance where you would say, I'm now in an open palm stance or anything like that. That's more along the lines of what style feats do. So if you're looking for more style support, there's plenty of that, but there's nothing that's directly, enter a stance and now you get some benefits. There's nothing there.
All right, we are ready to move on to the next segment. Luis, you're still willing to hang out with us for the entirety of the show?
Absolutely, that's part of what I do here at the No Direction Network.
Well, for the next segment, that participation is mostly going to be knowing grins.
I'm excited.
We'll be right back with the news right after this.
Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news.
And we're back.
In the Pathfinder news segment, we talk about all the latest happenings for the Pathfinder role-playing game and the campaign setting, both from Paizo and third-party publishers. And of course, the big news lately has been 2nd edition. We are still getting new blogs on a regular basis. We were told we would get at least 1 a week. I believe we've been getting at least 2 a week since then. And while we won't go into in-depth review of each of these blog articles, I encourage and actually expect that everyone has already read these. We are going to give our takes on some of the things that are they are our personal favorites, portions of 1st edition or aspects of the game, or some of the things that maybe surprised us. There was a lot of spell and alchemy contests in the last month or so of blogs. We have the Cleric Preview, which is the first class preview that has a spellcast. It's first spellcasting class preview, and it's one that we've been told often would be given a lot more support or different support than we're used to because of how clerics interact with archetypes. We got a preview of how spells work. We got a preview of the alchemist and how alchemy works. And they slipped in several ancestry blogs, including the halfling and the gnome, which just happened to be Param and my, I don't know about favorite races, but definitely pet races.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe we're both known for those two races as much as, say, Alex of the network is known for his kitsunes.
So of the news that we've seen so far, Param, what are some of the things that have caught you off guard or particularly interest you?
Well, they signaled this. I'll start with something easy because they signaled this going in, but it was kind of neat to see that this is a commitment and hopefully this will go forward. But the fact that alchemy is being divorced entirely from magic, whereas in Pathfinder and in a lot of interpretations of alchemy, it is very much married to magic. So they're making this definitely, this is non-magical, this is just crazy fantasy science, and they don't have a spell list. You see a lot of the things that we know of when we are talking about alchemists, such as the poisons and elixirs and the bombs, but we're not seeing that this is just here's parts of the cleric and wizard spell list, and by the way, you drink them.
Yeah, because alchemy never even had its own chapter in a book in the hardcover line of the Pathfinder role-playing game first edition. It was just the alchemy section of The Alchemist was practically a chapter long. It was this huge chunk that explained this is how it's like magic, this is how it's different from magic. So right off the bat, I like second edition's approach to alchemy as a separate thing, because like when you think there's divine magic, there's arcane magic, which is explained very well in the spell blog, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I can see how those are similar, even though the lore is different. But then you bring in science, and it's like, this should be completely different from magic. And now it will be.
Mm-hmm. Now, I hope that I really need to see how this is going to be mechanically different from magic, because whether or not it has the quote-unquote "this is magic" label, if it still follows the same thing of I spend these standard actions and mix this weird stuff together, and then here comes a thing that might as well be a spell effect, then I hope that's a little bit more disappointing, but I have faith that they will do a lot more to mechanically differentiate what the alchemist can do than, say, what would have been the other spellcasters in Pathfinder 1 if we were comparing them to the Alchemist. I want to see the Alchemist be obviously not a spellcaster if they're going to make this commitment.
Yeah, that was one of the things about the alchemy blog. It's Secrets of Alchemy, and it doesn't actually get into a whole lot of how alchemy is going to work. It gets into how alchemical magic items will work. And it's just possible that the alchemist will be the guy who makes alchemical magic items on the fly, or he might still retain some of his castery properties.
Mm-hmm. But we did get the Alchemist class preview, which showed off that they're definitely getting the elixirs. They're getting the mutagens. So we're going to definitely see the Jekyll Hyde scenario, and hopefully more variations than that. And of course, honestly, what almost all of my alchemists do all the time, to the point that they even forget they have any other class feature: bombs. You got to do the bombs.
I saw a lot of feedback on how these class features are being treated, because you are getting bombs right away. You're only getting mutagen at 5th level. But even though your experience with alchemists is that they go crazy with bombs, to some people the alchemist is synonymous with the mutagen class. And so the fact that now that's been deferred to 5th level means that if you want to recreate one of your first edition characters, suddenly you have to play him very differently until 5th edition when he 5th level. Until 5th level when he gets what you saw as a core class feature of that class. I am surprised there's not more paths built into the base alchemist as it's presented here. It feels like alchemy should be many things, and you get to choose which direction you take it. Almost like giving your alchemist the choice of a bloodline, a god, a spell specialization, spell school specialization. Feels like you could be the mutagen specialist, you could be the bombing specialist. Those feels like they shouldn't even be archetypes. Those should just be class decisions.
I can see that, and definitely it has a sort of like, it's almost like it's reverting to what we complained about the druid in Pathfinder First Edition, where if you wanted to make a shape-shifting druid, well, all the way until the shifter came out to try to solve that problem, if you wanted to make a shape-shifting druid, it was really hard to or character, it was really hard to even do that because you had to wait till such a high level before that became an option, and it never became really super practical to just rely on that constantly, because of it was considered a high level ability, and also there was a lot of opportunity tax slapped on that, and a lot of investment in a character that is going to go into that path. And I know this because Alex helped me try to put a shapeshifter focused character together for my Pathfinder Society character, and it was like 5 different classes, all of which with archetypes, most with multiple archetypes, just to get the base fantasy together. And I really hope that the Alchemist doesn't become in that direction, where if you want to be a Jekyll and Hyde, I hope there's some sort of, or not even Jekyll and Hyde, if you want to do the Hulk, or you want to do whatever else the mutagens can do for you, I hope that there is an option for characters that want to focus on that more directly.
Yeah, one of the trends in the class feature blogs is that they're not front-loading the classes like they used to. So the class fantasy is a great way of describing it. If you want your class to do something, then in first edition it got a little bit of all of those things. And in some cases that meant that if you take a level dip into that, you suddenly became a crazy versatile character. That, like, the Alchemist was one of those classes that it's like, you take one level and suddenly you have a suite of ranged weapons that you just don't have to spend any money on. You just have them, a limited number of them per day. So again, I get not putting bombs and mutagen both together at the first level, but a choice, an option would be wonderful. And Luis, I know you can't weigh in with your opinions, but can you keep us honest? Make sure you call us on anything that we are misrepresenting.
I guess one thing that I thought of, you mentioned that the Alchemist makes alchemical magic items, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't want to 100% say, but I played an Alchemist, and from what I remember, the Alchemist, all the alchemical items are intentionally not magical in any sense whatsoever. That way, if you end up in a spot like in an anti-magic field, for example, you can still drink some of these things and get the benefits.
Yes, I actually knew that. I misspoke, so I'm glad.
And that also helps for classes or characters that will refuse magic or can't be affected by magic. You can use alchemy to help them out instead.
Thank you, Luis. We're going to try and get through this quickly because I know you're just sitting
there.
It's
fine. It's fine.
Okay.
I don't mind.
Yeah. And I guess the other article we got that was the 1-2 punch was the Magic blog, and then later the Cleric blog, which let us see an actual spellcasting class and how that's going to interact with magic. And I suppose the biggest biggest surprise we saw in the magic section was, and I've lost my bookmark.
Mm-hmm. Was it the type of actions that each action is verbal, casting, semantic, and material, and each of those represents one of your actions you're taking?
That is not it, because we knew that from the original preview and in the Glass Cannon podcast actual play. Where
was it the spell lists?
They haven't mentioned what the spell lists are yet. It is.
We mentioned it in the cleric. In the cleric article, we mentioned that the cleric uses the divine spell list as a note.
Okay, that is something worth noting. So great, there is. But I was speaking of the traditions, which were the fundamental building blocks of all of magic, which they're talking about, where they were talking about the. And I've lost this.
Like the spiritual and things like that.
Yes. And I've lost it.
Arcane magic blends material essence and mental essence, the building blocks of rational thought, logic, and memories.
That's the
Whereas
one.
divine magic blends spiritual essence and vital essence, the life forces that give us instincts and intuition.
Mm-hmm. And that means that, well, what that will mean for how the spells and magic work is interesting, but as Luis just pointed out, since there is the quote-unquote the divine spell list that did torpedo one of the leading theories that each of these traditions was going to be the spell lists. And I'm glad that is true, because that would be very neat. But I was worried that that would generify all of the magic and make it more of a what you get when you're dealing with like a point-based character system or a building blocks-based game system, where you lose the very direct flavor that classes and defined options give. When it kind of what happened to Magic under the Words of Power system, where it was very interesting mechanically, but you lost a lot of the unique aspects of spells because they were just combining working parts together.
Daigle is in chat and is telling us not to ask Luis dangerous questions because he likes him and he doesn't want him to get eaten by Bullman.
Indeed. No dangerous questions to Luis. All right.
Well, Param, based on what you're talking about, we have already seen a little bit about how classes will specialize in certain magic. So even though the cleric has the divine magic spell list, it already has a whole bunch of specific class features tied to the heal spell, which is going to separate it from other classes that'll have the divine spell list, have access to heal, but will still not be healers like the cleric is. So that is how I can see the people using the same spell list. Like, if there's a divine spell list, I believe it's not a huge leap to assume one of the three other spell lists will be arcane, unless that's going to be broken up into two different kinds of arcane. And then something that would separate the magus from, say, the wizard. I know we're not getting magus in. Okay, so who are we getting? So the bard from the wizard would be how the bard uses buffing spells, versus the wizard will probably be just generally good at things.
Yes. Now, as far as we go into some of the specific mechanics, we do notice that they're adding rituals to the magic system, which is magic that you don't have to you don't have to cast. Well, you cast it, but it's not spell slot magic. They're basically talking about what they were introduced in the Occult Adventures, and if they make that core, we see a lot of this. 4th edition did this, and it was one of the things that was very defining of that edition, so I don't know how much of a similarity there's going to be here. But the basic idea that there is a type of magic that you can do during your downtime to achieve like the story-based or non-combat or exploratory type effects that isn't necessarily suited to combat or strategic adventuring. Things that would enable the stories to move forward that are very much not as useful when the initiative starts.
Well, it's not just that that's how the stories move forward, but entire stories can be built around rituals. Like if a ritual requires a specific... If you think of most episodes of Buffy that involved a spell, usually it was we have to gather up the resources and then we have to face hazards to get those resources. And now that we've got them all, we can cast the ritual and move forward. So it just becomes a component search. Like that becomes a viable and interesting story, whereas there was no real equivalent to that in 1st edition. Rituals were kind of a hammered-on thing later on that more or less worked the way you see them in fiction, but we already had spells with longer durations that kind of filled that thematic purpose without actually filling that storytelling purpose.
And it also,
I guess not thematic, but conceptual.
It also mentions that because you just need the knowledge and skill to cast these, it's something that you can involve like the whole party or the entire cult in together. It's something to bring everyone together for a common goal.
Now, Param, you are more of a spellcasting fan than I am. I will admit that I am surprised that spells and how spells work is one of the things I'm most excited about 2nd edition. But
really?
As somebody that is all in already on spells, how are you feeling about what we know so far?
I like a lot of the rituals. I like that we're going to have some mechanical play with the number of actions that they're going to take, and by default most are going to be 2 from what we're seeing, but having a few 1-action spells or 3-action spells and how that makes the tactical choice interesting is going to actually make the play a little bit more thinky for one of the already thinky classes, because strategically how you use your spells and when you use your spells and exactly how you make a spell not meant for a situation work in the situation is kind of the fun of playing any sort of spellcasting class. And adding another layer on top of that is going to add a lot more tactical thinking and fun. Now what we've seen with the Cleric is going to say that, and what we've seen hinted at with the critical system, is that there's going to be a little bit of a power down on what magic is capable of, or capable of overshadowing in the game. For one, we know that the spell slots, at least for the Cleric, are pretty significantly reduced from what you could expect playing Pathfinder 1st edition. The way that they're working it is that whenever you get a new level in a spells, you start with 2 slots, but you don't get any bonus slots from a high caster stat. And based on how you build spellcasters and advance the caster stat, you're usually in 1st edition we're almost always guaranteed that slot, as long as you quote-unquote built the character right. And I know that people hate that phrase, or there's assuming that there's a right way to build a character or a wrong way, but the commonly accepted method of building a spellcaster is always to focus at least significantly on your caster stat and to keep it leveled up as much as you can, because it's the most important stat for your character, which meant you always had the bonus slot. So this just sort of makes that math moot. So you're going to automatically start basically with that bonus slot. But then when you level up and you into the non-new spell level, I'm going to assume odd, you get that increases to 3 slots for that level and then stops going up. So a maxed out Cleric would have their spell slots would be 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 all the way down the list, which is a significant cut from even Clerics, which would normally be 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and then plus 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then stat on that would be another 1. So it's almost like half as many spell slots as you would be using in the 1st edition game. So that's definitely where we can see a power down. But to compensate that...
And what about the change in how non-spell powers will work, where they'll all be drawn from the same pool of spell points?
That's what I was saying. That's where we're getting a compensation for that. It seems to be with the concept of these non-spell powers, which used to just be a set of okay abilities that you could use on your character and you could build off of, but were never so much that they even began to equal consideration with your actual spells and your spell choices, because that was so critical to building a spellcaster. It didn't much matter that I have a ray I can use 7 times a day that dazzles an opponent, or a luck bonus that I can keep spamming, or a really short range teleport. Well, actually, that's one of the better options. Actually, the teleport School of Commiseration is a fantastic tactical option that Alex has enthusiastically explained to me in use. But most of the time, those abilities were rather minor, and they were fun, especially at low levels. But when you leveled up, you got some more potent abilities, but they never really rivaled your spellcasting. And assuming that those are going to use the common spell pool, and with the hints at the blog that those are going to become more interesting, especially with the choice of class feats, that's going to make your choice of specialization matter a lot more than it does in Pathfinder 1. Where Clerics always, it mattered a lot because some of the domains gave really significant power boosts, like getting a familiar is a significant power boost, and getting huge boosts to your cure light wound spells is important at core things they did. But for a lot of spellcasting classes, that hasn't always been true. Where your choice of, say, Wizard School really doesn't super matter. as long as you've got access to all those lovely, lovely spells per day. And being able to have a better sense of options from those choices and tying them in with those powers, that power pool, gives me hope that my wizard's going to be different from your wizard. My cleric is going to be much, much different from your cleric in play. My bard, actually we don't know how bards will work, but I really hope my bard can be different from the next bard. I wonder if a whole party of bards is going to be possible now. But definitely this gives us hope that a whole party of clerics could be significantly different from each other.
We're going to have to take a technical timeout because you were lagging and then speeding up quite a bit, and I'm not even sure if there's like a lag between us right now.
Oh, well, the good news is that you would have seen it and not our audience.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. So, because I'm the source broadcast, I'm the core of the quality. So any hiccups that happen to you, I have to worry about. But I will always be broadcast at full quality.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Oh, Adam Daigle even confirms in chat that looked good in his end. Bastille says no lag here. Okay, 5 seconds of silence, then we continue.
Yes. What actually excited me more than the spell point system was what they talked about with the channel energy for clerics. Now, I don't know that this is going to be... doesn't look like it's going to be an area where you can super customize, but this will definitely matter with how it plays into your domain choices from what we've seen. But it's just straight up, you can cast this spell a whole bunch of times. The most important spell for a cleric, of course, being heal. I guess traditionally that would have been cure blank wounds. But and with what we've seen about the heal spell basically becoming cure blank wounds plus the default channel energy combined into one superpower, being able to just cast your most iconic spell, especially what they're bringing you in to do a whole bunch of times, makes me interested to see what similar class options are going to be for other classes or different versions of the cleric, especially if there's a whole bunch of archetypes. Because could you imagine, like, I don't know that this is going to be even feasible, but like a cleric that worships the god of giants just having a whole bunch of enlarged persons or something similar. That opens up an interesting design space that, again, could make individual characters so much more vivid. And of course, the fact that it's based off of a skill of an existing spell, especially a scalable spell, means that there's going to be a lot more feeling like this is a quote-unquote real power, as opposed to channel energy, which was always super useful to the point that it almost made the actual cure spells pointless.
Whoa, I don't know about that.
Anyway,
that's... I saw both types of healing plenty, but since we are on the topic of healing, I want to say I am so glad they are killing the sacred cow of cure spells being what everyone calls heal. Like, I am going to heal you is what the cleric will say when he's casting cure spells, whereas heal was a much higher level spell. Mm-hmm. Like, just getting rid of all the cure blank wounds and just saying it's healing, which is what everyone calls it, and is more accurate to the definitions of the word heal and cure.
Well, that's what we're seeing so far in the documentation. I don't think we've seen any confirmation that there is no spell called Cure Blank Wounds. Or if we have, I haven't seen it.
I don't see what it could be in a world that the heal spell, as it's outlined in the All About Spells blog, exists.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't want to call that shot this early, especially since it is such a sacred cow. It's been a part of the tradition of the game since the 70s. I mean, so I also like that you don't have to that heal is heal and cure is not, because if the nomenclature, if you're not deeply invested in the fantasy of D&D and that lineage, is when you cast cure, you're getting rid of a status condition. When you cast heal, you're getting hit points back. It's kind of like how Paizo has the developer and designer words backwards on their job titles.
Well, on on top of that, like, no, you know what? There's nothing on top of that. I really hope that cure is gone. Or completely changed its purpose.
Yeah. And also, all the healing magic is back to being necromancies.
Yes, which I'm totally okay with. Like, if necromancy is supposed to be the school of forces of life, it shouldn't just be the forces of unlife. You need a certain amount of healing and positive life to balance that out. I know it's necromancy is kind of just viewed as the evil school, and
it's a very loaded word. So
yes.
Now, also one of the big important things that they've talked about, and we finally got to see some like physical, real hard definition of, is the scaling spells. They're the heightening spells, as they're calling them, as they called it in the Magic blog, which is that the heal spell is the heal spell, and it gets more powerful as you slot it in higher spell slots. It's still the heal spell, and that's something we saw with the scaling spells first with psychic magic, and then a lot more of that in Starfinder. And I really like that system in both places I've seen it used. It makes like that choosing to power up that spell is a fun decision to make. And so I like to, or vice versa, power it down when you don't need to waste the whole thing on the scratch. I think it adds a great dynamic to the game, and it eliminates the need to write, this is heal 1, this is heal 2, this is heal 3. We're going to need one of these every level, so I'm going to fill up 2.5 pages worth of our word count detailing all 7 of them.
I agree, and that is one of the reasons that I'm enjoying spells formatting. Just the potential to do more with less space. For some reason, that excites me.
And as somebody who is going to have to learn how to turn these into cards soon, I'm also surprised and maybe a little excited that the formatting, at least the layout that we've seen of the spells, is significantly simpler than the existing first edition spell stat block.
Is it significantly simpler?
It is, yes. Oh my goodness,
okay.
Yes. It is like half of what I would normally worry about in a spell block. And I say that as someone who has had to meticulously format and try to squeeze in that upper part of a spell stat block into a very tiny spaces.
And I guess we don't have the series of square brackets and round brackets. Now it's just all kind of dumped as schools and sub-school. Or I guess it's just all schools now. There's no more sub-schools. Yep. Or at least there's none illustrated yet.
But that's all we've seen here on the blog. This is all likely to change ridiculously in the future.
Hold on. It's not going to likely to change for the playtest, because those books are going to print soon. What is going to happen for second edition is still up in the air.
Well, also, this is on a blog, and so I don't know how that's actually going to be when it's actually formatted on a printed page. We don't know what their layout looks like yet.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were broadening up. I didn't realize you were still specifically talking about formatting. So yeah, that makes sense. Any thoughts on halflings?
Well, they're codifying a lot of the very Galarian specific parts of the halfling, the lucky halfling, the halfling slave, halflings make good slaves thing. It wasn't a lot of surprises here. They're back down to being 20-foot speed, but at the same time we saw that the humans, I believe in one of the I think it was the Glass Cannon podcast, we saw they had 25-foot speed, so it's not as drastic, but I might be wrong there.
I know elves are the fastest with 35, I believe.
So I might be wrong there. But first, that's speed being a drastically different stat is interesting. Especially since there's not just the 2 speeds, 20 and 30. And other than that, I dig a lot of their background, but it's a lot of the same stuff we've seen already established in Pathfinder, so there weren't a lot of surprises here. I do like that the from Lucky Halfling is in there from Halfling is a Galarian, which actually codifies, hey, where they actually are lucky. So here is a race feat you could take, or ancestry feat, sorry, that you could take that actually emphasizes the fact that you're lucky.
So I just double checked. Elves are listed as the fastest, going 30 feet with a speed of 30 feet. Humans do have 25, and this is because you can use one of your 3 actions to move that speed, which means that effectively you could still move. You can move 50 feet and still do something else in a round.
And I can tell you, and many halflings that have chosen to play rogues, which you would think is like bread and butter because it's the most iconic class for the race, how much that 20-foot speed hurts, especially when you're constantly having to half it, because you're trying to use that to tumble or sneak or various other methods to get to the back ranks, and why when the Advanced Race Guide came out, every single halfling player I know took the enhanced speed race option from that point forward.
Now, I'm not a big halfling guy. I have nothing against them. I just don't tend to play them. But I am happy to see the slings are going to be emphasized, because the sling is just one of those weapons in first edition that is just categorically worse than everything else. It's just not a good choice. And having to choose the iconic, like having to accept that you are choosing one of the worst options to choose the iconic weapon of your class when there's not even that much rules to support it, and especially like there could be so many things you could do with a sling that's different from other magic items, or sorry, not magic items, ranged weapons, and yet not a whole lot was done, probably because it was already an option that was starting with a deficit, so any options to support that deficit is either going to be overpowered when compared to similar ranged weapon options, or just has to accept that you're always going to be a little behind the curve. But the sling is iconic for the halflings, and seeing the fact that an entire paragraph of the halfling write-up was dedicated to their iconic weapon gives me hope that people who want to play the archetypal version of that ancestry will be able to do that with their iconic weapon.
And I like that they're getting rid of the size difference entirely, so the short races aren't always using worse versions of every weapon.
As for gnomes, these are my boys. And I would say also that there's not a whole lot of surprises here. There is a little bit more alchemy worked in as an option for the class, so you can either be the natural caster or a natural alchemist. I believe that's a choice and not something that all gnomes get both. Let's see. Yeah, your Fey Fellowship verse is there. Anyway, somewhere in there is mention of alchemy. I'm almost positive. Hold on. Now I'm doubting myself, Param.
Doubting yourself is always a good thing to do when we are doing a live episode.
There we go. So magic better and alchemical bombs. Anyway, it's something that was never a huge part of the rules for gnomes, but was part of a lot of people's concepts going into it of how a gnome should play in Pathfinder, and that's being embraced more. And that's really the only change that I can see from how the rules are being described here.
And that's something that has actually, that was something that the community kind of influenced, because if you remember at the very beginning of Pathfinder, they wanted to very much focus that gnomes are fey and magical, and that's the direction we want to go. We don't want engineering gnomes. We didn't want sciencey gnomes. We, like you've seen in other fantasy fiction, we wanted magical little fey gnomes, and we just saw that line in the sand that they tried to hold kept slipping the further along Pathfinder went, to the point where in Dave Gross's novel we see a gnome that focuses on clockworks, and then alchemy and gnomes sort of become married fairly early on when the alchemists become an option, and gnomes get some of the best alchemy options going, and so this making that codified is actually a big step in how there was the original vision for where they wanted to go with this race. and the fact that the community and popular thought of what the race should be has changed it.
Bard Wannabe is asking, did we see the complaints about all the small races getting a bonus to charisma now? So this actually goes back to the alpha playtest of first edition, because when it was decided that every race would get 2 bonuses and 1 penalty, whereas in third edition, all of them, or most of them, got 1 bonus and 1 penalty. Halfling was the one that for every single playtest got a different mental ability score bonus. So at first they got intelligence, which was okay. Then, or at one point they got wisdom, which doesn't really fit with the idea that halflings are kind of naive and childish. And so they got charisma, which was probably the most natural fit because they are a jovial race, but was probably the resistance was that gnomes definitely needed that because gnomes were naturally magical, and naturally magic. The other side of charisma is natural attunement to magic. And so, like, the pushback was not having both small races in the core rulebook have the same or have comparable ability score bonuses. It just made the most sense. Now the fact that goblins also have the bonus to reflect that they are a, fun-loving, song-based race. Yeah, I mean, yes, the trend is small and charisma bonus, and I guess some diversity there would be okay. But is it really that bad that all 3 of them have that in common?
It doesn't bother me because because they're first. What else could it be? I mean, you could argue that gnomes
I could say
could trade,
wisdom, maybe. Go ahead.
You could say that gnomes could trade for another stat, but you mentioned why it just doesn't work for halflings because they've never really been a scholarly race, and wisdom is absolutely the wrong fit for them entirely. And then we go and look at goblins. Intelligence, Lord, no. Like, in the very first time we ever see Pathfinder goblins, there's a discussion with how some of them might end up accidentally killing themselves during their own raid. So we know they're not the smartest monsters to ever exist. And wisdom, also, Lord, no. It will not work. Because these things have to be absolutely insane and kind of gullible. And the other unwritten rule about the 2 pluses is one of them has to be in a mental score. And so that only leaves charisma. And that's a natural fit because goblins have charmed the entire Pathfinder fan base to the point that they literally replaced Paizo's mascot and took the crown.
And Bard Wannabe is saying that he agrees with those who propose that if both gnomes and goblins are charisma, halflings should be wisdom. We already addressed that. You mentioned giving gnomes another ability score. I guess you can give gnomes intelligence, and it goes a little more to the tinker side, but still applies to them being naturally inclined to arcane. It's just that instead of being like naturally, as in it's just fusing through their body, they've just got they're able to figure it out. So. Yeah, that's the only shift I would make. If you change one of them, change gnomes from charisma to intelligence.
And I also think that that's a really meta way of thinking about the games and its stats. I think it's more important to look at the race and give it the stats that best fits the race than to try to do this overall meta discussion of balancing where the stats are distributed, especially when it's just so arbitrary it's not all the races have charisma, it just happens to be all the ones that can't ride the tilt-a-whirl at the local carnival. Especially since their being small sized means so much little compared to what it meant in first edition, where it affected almost everything the race did, and now at least it looks like it's going to have a much less effect. These are just 3 races of the entire gamut of 3 ancestors. It's going to be really hard for me to get used to that change, even though I strongly support that change. These are just 3 of the ancestries of the entire game, and I think secting them off and saying, well, they're the small ones and they all have charisma is just, like I said, super meta and not a really productive way of looking at it, especially since as soon as we start getting the expanded ancestries and we see things like Wei-Yang and Tengu, they're going to obviously not follow that same mold, because for those ancestries, the natural fits are so much different.
So I'm surprised Bard Wannabe and Bosteel both say they don't understand your argument against wisdom. I'm not sure if they're talking about goblins or halflings, but let me sum up what I understood, because I followed your argument, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay.
So wisdom bonuses are based on things like sense motive and will saves, neither of which goblins have been described as good at. Oh, okay. They're both saying for
halflings.
Halflings. Okay.
So the wisdom bonus makes sense for the Hobbit version of the halfling, especially as Tolkien described them. But they don't make a lot of sense for Galarian's child version of the halfling, where the natural aversion to magic isn't really magical influence isn't a focus in Pathfinder, and their naivety is a focus, so giving them a bonus to wisdom is counterproductive to that part of the flavor. Now, if these were even more Hobbit-like, and they were more conservative, and they had natural resistances to magical and mental influences mentioned a lot, that I would see that. But the plucky halfling that has become the fantasy gaming trope doesn't follow into the traditional Hobbit version of the race that they began as. And it's not all the way to Kinder, where it is just annoyingly exuberant, but it doesn't fit how they've been portrayed in the game so far.
Luis, you've been sitting quietly, patiently for too long. What do you want to talk about? Let's move on to the banter segment of the news section.
Okay.
Yeah, this 2E talk is over. We can now talk to Luis about stuff that won't get him in trouble.
Yeah.
Apparently. Luis, what have you been playing lately?
I've been playing a lot of 2nd edition playtest.
Oh, darn it! You can't even sabotage this right out the beginning.
I've also been playing a good amount of Starfinder here with people at work, which is actually my first game ever of Starfinder.
Nice. Are you playing in the current adventure path? The Dead Zones?
No. Jason Keeley is just running us through his own linked set of scenarios from Starfinder Society.
Ooh.
And I'm sure maybe someday he'll make a grand scheme, giant, awesome plot out of it. But right now it's pretty much Society play.
Yeah, and that is the secret of Starfinder, is that the adventure path is good and all, and I don't want to deride the adventure path, but the work that the Society team has been doing with those scenarios has been absolutely magical, and really showcases the strengths of Starfinder as a science fantasy game, and shows its various influences, and it really helps that it leads it to that sort of episodic adventuring that a lot of the science fiction and science fantasy influences have, such as your Star Treks and your other sci-fi shows, or even some of your sci-fi novels, where it's a lot more about this is what we're doing today, and then tomorrow we're doing something completely different. And they're just so well written. They're so well done.
Yeah, we had a big Star Trek-like moral quandary very recently with one of these scenarios, and it's one that Jason wrote himself. So if you want to track that one down, you can. I think it's
103 is the one.
1-3, yeah, I think is what it. Yeah, and that was great. More so because we had the writer of the adventure running it for us, and he could flesh things out just a bit more than what's on the page. And he's a very animated GM, and I really enjoy everything that he's been running for us so far.
What are you playing?
I'm playing a Vesk soldier who, right when Starfinder came out, I realized the Vesk has a built-in unarmed attack little buff where they basically get improved unarmed strike for free, and I decided I wanted to play one of those, and I'm finally getting to do that, and my character is known as the Punch Lizard.
You managed to bring martial arts into Starfinder.
Yep, he just is up front and always punching, and it actually makes for really nice in situations where it's like, well, you can't bring any weapons, or make sure you're unarmed. It's like, okay, I just walk on, no problem.
All right, I'm cooking up a pun here. How does pugilizard sound?
It sounds good to me. I love it.
Or just pugiliz? No, pugilizard. We got to spell it
Pugilizard,
out.
I think, works well.
All right.
But it just doesn't have the impact of punch lizard.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on what kind of impact you're going for. Luis, have we ever gamed together?
No, we haven't, but we could at PaizoCon.
No. We must at PaizoCon.
We must at PaizoCon.
So what kind of a player would you say you are?
I don't know. I'm usually the GM, so I've not been a player since I've been playing tabletop games. Let's see, 14 years. I'd say a total of a year and a half worth of that time has been me as a player.
Is that want or necessity?
A little of both. When someone decides, hey, I'll be the GM, that it turns out kind of makes you be the GM all the time, because everyone just assumes, oh, you'll be the GM again, right? And usually I say yes, because I kind of want to. I really like the control I have as a GM and putting all these seeds in place for adventures and characters and hooks and everything, and then finally getting to see them pay off, and just that excitement that comes with that. And also, it lets me just like cook up my own ideas and add in my little homebrew side stories or monsters or whatnot.
Now, I know the three of us are going to be at PaizoCon, and I know this is probably asking for a lot of time commitment, but my ideal scenario would be each of us gets a chance to GM. That way, each of us gets a chance to play with each other.
We could do if we chose a quest instead of full-length adventures. Easy enough. Like the House of Perfection would be a fantastic one to do that with. Mainly because I just really like that quest set.
Is that for Starfinder or Pathfinder?
That one's for Pathfinder.
Okay, I didn't hear the title.
House of Perfection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm up for that. We'll discuss this off air, but I just know that, Param, you and I have...
Oh, sorry. House of Harmonious Wisdom. Thank you for the correction.
So you and I have been playing together a lot recently, and that's something that for years we have not had a chance to do. And I've also... You've GM'd me at least once, right? I'm sure you have. Maybe you haven't. Can you remember any time that you've GM'd me? We have played together online a couple of times.
I have not got to do any of that, no.
Oh. We need to fix that. And I don't know if...
Okay, this is our meetups. Hey, let's hang out. Totally. We do a lunch. We sort of pass equipment. I buzz by your booth a few times to annoy you. And then, man, that was a great convention. We spend much more time together without seeing each other than we ever do when we happen to be in the same geographic location.
All right, PaizoCon's changed that, Param.
Yes.
Didn't we room together for one Gen Con?
Yes.
Yeah, and even then,
no.
It was just equipment classing and plotting our recordings.
Yeah, Gen Con especially. I know for you it's work for a different sort, and for me it's work for the network, because that's the con that I'm the one that's picking up the mantle and saying that Ryan worked his butt off for PaizoCon and I've got to make a difference.
Well, you definitely work your butt off for Gen Con too. Yeah. And actually, since we're speaking about Gen Con and PaizoCon, Adam Daigle is in chat and he's reminding us that Paizo is looking for GMs for Gen Con. There's some sweet benefits, he says, depending on how many slots you GM. I believe there was a blog post about that yesterday, definitely this week. So if you are interested in GMing for Gen Con, or if you'd like to go to Gen Con, funds are a little tight and you're looking for alternatives, check out the Paizo.com blog about Gen Con and see if maybe you and Paizo can, help each other out.
Yeah, I've done the Paizo Slave Track a couple of years, and it is an interesting, fun experience to do. You're going to get to work with some very talented people and running for Paizo at Gen Con, you get to see so many different types of people that you never get to see in your local game groups. It is an enriching experience, and that is before they give you the store credit and you get to just raid the Paizo booth. And depending on how much you do, you get free tickets, and I believe there's even a way to get a free slot in a hotel room, and that's the really hard one to get. Actually, you have to commit to do a whole lot of GMing to get that, or you have in previous years, but that's the real Grail prize there.
I was talking with Tanya Woolbridge about that just yesterday. One thing she wanted to make note, one of the different rewards is some Pathfinder or Starfinder products, and if you get in before the 28th, I believe that's Sunday or Monday, and get up to that tier, one of the things that you can get as your free product is a copy of the playtest book for 2nd edition. So
Nice.
That's one way to get your hands on that.
Yeah, I saw a post on that, and she even said that if you do it early enough, it can be the hardcover.
Wow. And you know what? I have not placed my order yet. I think I'm going to do that tonight after we record.
Oh, yeah.
We are actually counting down the days that you can still get in on that pre-order, and if I don't get in on it, it is going to be much more difficult to get that product.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
I mean, I know the stuff's going to be available for free as PDFs, so if you're just interested in participating in the playtest, you don't have to commit to it right now. But if you're interested in keeping any of these keepsakes or just playing with the more tactile version of it, you need to place your order before May 1st at 11:59 p.m. So as of this recording, that's a week.
Yep. And
that is less than a week.
Yes,
I've
less
just
than
checked
a
the
week.
calendar.
And by the time you're hearing this, that's probably even less than that. So get on that if you're hearing this and you forgot. And for those of you that's trying to be more pragmatic about your purchases, keep in mind that the flip maps, those are likely going to be very useful post 2nd edition beta being retired. And that's something, like, you can get PDFs of everything, but the flip maps are going to be actually useful to have a physical version of beyond. Even if you're an iPad player, that's something you can still appreciate having. Now, we've been playing a lot of stuff lately, haven't we, Ryan?
We have. We've only released one episode of Adventurous, which is the actual play podcast we've been running. We've been playing, and it's been run by Crystal Fraser. But we have played 5 sessions at this point. No, 6 sessions.
Nope.
2 recording sessions, which makes up 6 episodes, so it's about 6 hours of the adventure. We're still working on perfecting the scheduling, so the original plan was 5 hours of recording, which makes 4 hours of adventure. That became 3 hours in the first session, which became 2 episodes because the first one became extra long, but that released last Friday. The next episode will release this Friday, and then we will have weekly all the way up until the week of PaizoCon, in which case we will be skipping, but we will be recording a live episode at PaizoCon if all goes according to plans.
And the reception, you guys seem to be liking it. I've heard nothing but good things in reply for it, and we are having an absolute blast. It is crazy that we're getting to play with a group of this caliber, and especially with Crystal as the GM, and the adventure itself is really up my alley of the kind of games I like to play, where it's a whole lot of social and story content. And I don't want to spoil it, but we haven't rolled a whole lot of initiative checks.
We have not. We haven't even rolled a whole lot of dice. Crystal is encouraging role-playing by rewarding you with basically a success at a skill check if you role-play it well enough.
And encouraging
or not even well enough, but just get engaged that much.
Yeah. And she also, one of her GMing techniques is to ask us, what do you have on a 10? But when she expects that that's going to be a pass, so that we're moving very quickly through things. So it's a blast.
Now, one thing that I found interesting is right from the first session, Param, when you tend to be in character for most of it. So even if you're talking about a role you're going to make, it seems like you're going to be using your character's voice to describe, oh, I want to, do whatever. I want to check on these things. Whereas I tend to think, unless I'm actually verbalizing something as my character, I'm talking as Ryan, the player. And it seems like you're the only person that has that play style in this group. Is that how your groups tend to play? And were you surprised that the rest of us don't do the same thing?
I'm used to being in character a lot more than we are during the play sessions, and also a lot of that has to do with my very strong difficulty doing accents. So
Okay.
I'm staying in his I'm staying in Alan Croft's accent because I have a hard time maintaining accents and naturally slipping back into my natural voice if I'm not paying attention to it. So the reason you hear Alan Croft talk about, well, I think I better roll an initiative check, is because if I don't, I'm likely to forget to get into his accent when it becomes very much time to try to convince Ariadne, our way too lawfully good paladin that I absolutely love so much, to go along with political scheming.
And just to be clear, Ariadne's the player's name. Her character is Vincenza.
Yes.
And yeah, she's been a delight. I consider Ari our secret weapon.
Yeah.
Because not only is she like incredibly credible outside of, like, she's the only person that's a celebrity among gamers outside of the Pathfinder the Pathfinder table. She wrote For Honored. Like, she has legitimate video game credit. And she's just kind of like the unknown for most of our audience, because other than a couple of Geek Togethers and a couple of No Directions and a couple of Private Sanctuaries.
So more time than we've given poor Luis.
Yeah. As I'm going towards the end of that sentence, I don't know how to complete it. 'Cause so you know what? Ari's been around for a while. She's practically a network member. Well, anyway, she's also got credentials beyond our type of credentials, which is fun. And she is a great role player and a natural role player, because she has not been role playing that for that long or plays that often. I may have been in every role playing session Ari's ever had, come to think. I wonder if she's ever played without me. I should ask her that.
Are you going to feel cheated on if it's true? Every now and then, when I hear one of my players has found another group, I'm just like, I'm happy for them. The problem goes, "Aw."
Yes and no. I believe we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, where it's ideas I had for one group, I then transferred over to another group that I was role-playing with, and it kind of felt like I was cheating on one group. And actually, I never announced this, but I left my group, my home group, more or less disbanded. Actually, no, they're still playing without me, but like Matt, Jay, Jeff, I'm no longer playing with those guys. I couldn't take on Adventurous and keep my game group going, and it just felt like a lot of how I play was differing from how that group was evolving playing, and we were drifting apart. Not that we were drifting apart, but just I wasn't having the same engagement and fun that I used to. And so after 15 years, longer than we've been doing the podcast, I'm no longer role-playing with Matt and Jay.
Dude, that just doesn't even make sense to my brain.
I know. I don't have a game table set up in my house right now.
This is
I know part of
heresy.
that's just staging, but it's true, because I've moved on to virtual tabletop. We've been playing Adventurous over Roll20, who have supplied us with the adventure path, character sheets, basically all the assets that we play with.
We do have
they
to
have
mention
provided
specifically the words, they are a sponsor.
They are a sponsor, yeah. They are the people. We start every episode saying it's brought to you by Roll20, and that's what we mean. They are providing us with all the gear and the tech for free, and in exchange for us talking well about them.
Yeah.
But that is literally my only tabletop right now, is Roll20.net.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't do that, man. I love that we're getting to do this, and I love playing online when that's my option. But I've got to get my hands on real dice, and I'm not gonna have that game room and not use it. Like that would just be like. That would be the ultimate irony. It's like, oh man, this sweet rigged out game room with every single bit of physical game prop you can imagine shoved into the corners around here. You want a castle GM screen made of stone? You got it. You want an actual, you want a whole stack of Dwarven Forge? I've got that over there. You want like handcrafted puzzle time boxes? Yeah, we've got one of those because one of my friends, Ricky, spends way too much time doing cool things. But and then to just like sit in the corner using my computer and Roll20, and I love Roll20, and I love their sponsorships of the podcast, and it lets me do things, but I've got to put that real table to use.
Well, as you know, I'm house hunting right now, and one of the criteria is still, whenever I check the basement, where would a game table fit in here? Where would my game collection fit in? So it is something that I still intend to have in the future, but the fact that I put it away for the staging of our house so that we could sell it, and that I haven't been itching to put it back up, is both surprising. No, there's no other thing about that. It is very surprising to me.
Yeah. Luis, we have to solve this problem. We're going to bum rush Ryan's house when he moves into it, and all night gaming. No, you're not in for it.
Cool.
No, not in for it, Luis.
No, I'm completely up for it.
Perm, why do you think he's saying no? Everything I've heard was him saying yes.
Oh, sorry, there was a delay on my end. I just saw him sitting there quiet. I was like, oh, crap.
Oh, okay. I am interested in this Costello con you're proposing, and I will think about it and discuss it with Tina, and I guess discuss it with Scarlett, because she will definitely have opinions on it. Oh, apparently Bard Wannabe confirms that since you didn't hear it, they didn't hear it. But yeah, Luis, can you just confirm clearly and on the audio track, would you come to my house for an all-night gaming session when I move?
Yes, I would play games all night with you in your new home.
All right. We're taking that as legally binding.
That's a verbal contract, apparently, that I just signed myself up for.
And crap, I need to go actually get a passport.
Yes. Oh, it boggles my mind that there's anyone who doesn't have a passport. I do understand that international travel is more common for Canadians than Americans, but still, it's a passport. Like, it's a cornerstone of your identity, isn't it?
Oh,
no, we can usually get by with just like a driver's license for most things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes alongside the old joke of what do you call someone who speaks two languages?
Canadian?
Bilingual. But what do you call someone who speaks one language?
American?
Exactly.
Yay.
Okay. I'm not familiar with this joke. Apparently it's an old one.
Yes. We also
That's
don't
not
need
true.
passports.
There's a lot of Canadians that only speak the one language. I think. I don't know. I just assume outside of Quebec there's not as much French.
Well, what's next?
We have some questions.
Ooh, questions?
It's been a long time since we've done a no question segment, but a couple of them came in this week, and I was just like, yeah, sure, why not?
I thought Lauren came and mugged us of that section.
She did, and she did a really awesome one today, talking to someone who is role-playing is outside their comfort zone, but they're in a new gaming group. And she was actually super excited when she got the question, so much so that she accused me of writing it and sending it to her for some reason. So, like, just at midnight one night, she sends me a message, I know what you did. And I'm like, there's a very good chance I did something and either forgot or just don't know what she's talking about. So let's see how this plays out. And it probably took a good hour of convincing her that, no, this is a real question. It's not from me. And go forth and help this person. They need you.
Oh, 5-second random tangent since we mentioned Lauren. Her character, Lily in Adventurous, is so good. And especially
she's
the part where
I love her. It's hilarious, everything that she got up to in the first episode.
Oh, I know. Especially I was surprised that any of our characters had such an affinity towards mass homicide.
Well, especially she's so sweet.
I think that was my favorite misunderstanding so far. I'm sure there will be plenty of those.
Yeah, she has a great combination of role-playing and mechanics in part 2. Like, she just switches back and forth between two of them. I just edited that part of it last night, and it was exciting to watch. It was as exciting to edit as it was to watch the first time.
Oh, there's so much goodness in episode 2. That's the one I'm really waiting for to see people's reaction to.
So before we move on to the questions, I do want to remind people that we have a contest going on. It is the #KnowTheMan contest. That's man, M-A-H-N, because this is all about getting Jason Bullman's social media, getting more eyes on his social media. If you are a Pathfinder player, Pathfinder enthusiast, a game design enthusiast, Jason Bullman is both an extremely talented and informed individual who is sharing all kinds of information and insight into 2nd edition Pathfinder, into game design, into just his life as one of the most prominent game designers in the industry. He shares these ideas on Facebook and Twitter, and he has criminally low number of followers on both for someone of his position. So in order to help him out, we came up with the Know the Man contest, in which if you hashtag Know the Man, like his page, and tag up to 2 friends who you think would also enjoy following his page or his Twitter feed, then you get entered into a raffle for a whole bunch of Jason Bullman related prizes. Just one thing to clarify, that you get 1 entry just for using the hashtag, if you've liked the page, and then you get 2 additional entries for each of these additional 2 people that you enter, which means that you can get maximum 5 entries for each platform, so a maximum of 10 entries into the contest for a single individual if they like his page, use the hashtag on Facebook and tag 2 friends, and then like his Twitter or follow him on Twitter and use the hashtag and direct 2 friends to his Twitter account. Some of the prizes, actually, the prizes are better read over on the blog post that we posted on nodirectionpodcast.com, because it does go into the more followers he has, the better the prizes go. But I can say that it does include a physical copy of Cryptid the Everflame, which is one of his most famous scenarios that will be signed. That's if we get high enough, as well as a copy of the Pathfinder First Edition rulebook signed by Jason Bullman.
Wonderful prizes.
Isn't one of the a copy of the playtest even there, or potentially?
If he gets 2,000 new followers on Facebook and Twitter combined, and that's not unique, so if you follow on Facebook and Twitter, you do count as 2 new followers for that tally, then he will sign a special edition copy of the Pathfinder Second Edition playtest. So the no question segment, we take questions from the audience about the Pathfinder role-playing game, about role-playing in general. Whatever you have on your mind, you can ask us, and we will do our best to help you out. Perrin, would you like to read Mark Orr's question?
Okay. After listening to No Direction number 175, I'm interested in learning how to start a gaming blog. Do you have any advice on how to start a blog, what blogging platforms are awesome, and how to get readers? Oh,
All
boy,
right.
That's a big one.
It is a big one, and so in 175 we talked about how Randall, one of our new bloggers, started a blog. Like, we challenged him to start a blog, and he met it and did extremely well with it. So Mark would also like to know how he can do the same, not necessarily to get to be a part of our network, but just to get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what you're doing on social media, one thing I will always say is that the most important thing is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Especially of your release schedule and more or less of your format. So if you can only commit to 1 blog every 2 weeks, make sure you are getting 1 blog every 2 weeks and hit that mark, and make sure it's consistently coming out at the same pace, because it just becomes part of people's lives. And so people know, oh, look, they can look forward to it. They know that they get used to the alternating day of the week or whatever it is. You probably want to be more frequent than that, but a completely infrequent, just something that comes out whenever, you're never going to build a fan base, because people will never make it part of their lives. It will never be normalized into their daily routine or their weekly routine. And so it might be something that they read a chunk of when they've noticed or remembered that it's out there, but you'll never have a sustained audience if you're just doing these things in chunks. So first advice is consistency. Figure out what your release schedule will be ahead of time and make sure you hit it. Second of all, is definitely making sure you can talk about the idea you have as much as you can, because I have had several blog ideas that would have been on the blog if I hadn't outlined and realized that, you know what, no, this is just an interesting topic to me, but not something I have a lot to say. So outline 5 or 6 different topics. Make sure you write a paragraph to yourself explaining what this blog will be about. And then if you've got the content there, get going. When we launched the Private Sanctuary podcast, then as 3.5 Private Sanctuary, I outlined the first 10 episodes just to make sure we had content. And honestly, by the time I had the 10th outline, I knew what the next 10 would be. But I still recorded the first 5 episodes before releasing the first one, just to, again, make sure that everything I have in mind works the way I think it works. And so that would be my next piece of advice is get a backlog, or I guess get a front log, so that backlog is the correct term. There's no such thing as a front log. I don't know what a front log is. So make sure that when you're ready to launch, you've got enough content to hit those next few dates, especially because birthdays happen, holidays happen, things that will throw you off your writing schedule happen, but that can't affect your release schedule. So you have to make sure that you have a couple of evergreen topics that are ready, that are ready to go for the times that you can't hit it. And then anytime you come up with something that's a little more topical, like if you want to do something that references something that's current in pop culture, fit that in and then move the backlog so you always have a safe distance between you and running out of content. So that's my advice for how to make sure you can launch it. Param, you're more someone that can tell them about blogging platforms and other technical sides of it. What do you think?
Okay, so you've got a few good options for blogging platforms nowadays if you want to push that kind of content. So there's a few things I need to tell you to do. First is to make sure that you get a Twitter account and a Facebook account at the very minimum for your social, because when it comes time to start promoting this, you're going to want that space nicely prepared. But that's not likely to be where your actual content lives. So the two most popular options right now for blogging platforms are either to go the traditional route and get like a WordPress setup, either hosted at WordPress or self-hosted through a hosting platform, and then using WordPress as your CMS software, or more, I'm seeing a lot more of just straight up Tumblr blogs anymore. That seems to be a good, strong alternative that you can do, and also sort of wraps you up automatically into a vibrant social platform automatically just by being on Tumblr. Then you're going to want to promote your releases on a blog page you make, a page for your blog on Facebook, and you're going to want your blog to have, you actually don't have to have, the blog doesn't need to have its own Twitter, though it can help if it's going to be a bigger-ish project, but you can promote your blog personally on Twitter every single time you put a release out. Without fail, do that. That at least is the bare minimum amount of self-promotion you're going to need to be doing. Now, there are other options for software if you feel you want to do that, but those are by far the two you're going to want to set up. And don't get your bogged down with a lot of the technical stuff. You can buy pre-made WordPress templates that will instantly make your blog look a lot better than the default free stuff for under $100, and that will give you a leg up and give you access to some features and help you stand out. And if there's one thing you will want to invest in a little bit of money, is a logo for any sort of website you launch as a semi-professional venture. There's a myriad of places you can hire an artist to do a logo for you if you don't have the graphic design skills yourself. It's the most important piece of art you will buy for your business. Do put some thought into it. Look at the design space, come up with something, and trust your graphic designer if you're not a graphic designer. They do know what they're talking about. They do this for a living, and they know all the pitfalls to not do that will make your blog look instantly unprofessional. Unfortunately, even if your writing is brilliant, if you put together an unprofessional presentation, people will write you off instantly, and nobody's going to find out that your writing is brilliant. Also, look at royalty-free imagery that you can use, Creative Commons stuff, stock photography, other stuff that's licensed for free use, because if you don't have at least one image for every 400 words you write, your blog is going to suffer. Also, learn the correct formatting for the web. You want to be able to do headings and bulleted lists and quote blocks and that sort of stuff built into your basic CMS theme and CSS and all that jazz theme for your website, and use it correctly to make your content easily skimmable. Because if it's just a giant chunk of text with improvised formatting, it will also just be written off and nobody's going to read it.
Couple of other points about making a logo, because that was definitely one of the things I was going to recommend if you didn't. But make sure that your logo, either you get two versions of the logo or the logo applies both in a square and in a rectangle, because just look at Facebook. You need two pictures there. Both of those are your identity. So if you only have a nice long logo, and then when you try and squeeze it into the square, it becomes completely unreadable, then it's pointless. So you need either an alternate logo or an alternate design on the same logo.
Yep.
Also, when it comes to naming your blog, naming your if you're going to have subcategories of the blog, two things. One, say it out loud and make sure that people can say it. Two, Google it. Make sure it doesn't already exist.
Also, it's anymore titling something by what domain name you can get is super important because being able to get the right .com or .net or .org, you really want the .com, even though that's super hard to get anymore. It's less important than it used to be, but it's still super important. If you can get the .com, get it. Is often even more important than getting the name you really wanted. To the point that, say, one of the most successful video game sites on the internet right now is Giant Bomb. Giant Bomb is named Giant Bomb because that's the domain name they could get. That's the only reason it has that name. They have famously said as much, and I know a lot of websites that are very successful today that's the answer. But when you are looking for that website, Google it, because some underhanded domain registrars will quote-unquote help you out by pre-registering the domain you search for, so that locks you into having to buy it from them when you're quote-unquote checking if it's available. So be very careful about where you check for whether or not a domain name is available, because some rather shady people like to see that and then snipe it out from under you.
Yeah, literally every word in the English dictionary, .com, is owned by somebody. So if you are naming your blog, like let's say if Alex wanted to get guidance.com, that's not going to happen. Somebody already owns it. I just looked it up. Apparently it's an e-commerce website. But if it wasn't, then somebody else owns it. And if it's a single word, and especially an evocative word like guidance, buying that from whoever owns it will cost tens of thousands of dollars. So you're either going to want to put a clever spin on the spelling of your word and make sure that it's not so clever that people have no idea how to do it. Well, the popular thing is to drop an E from a word that ends in ER, or front load it with an extra letter, usually a vowel. Or more likely you want to do a combination of two words that's not a popular expression, because odds are if it's an expression, it's been registered by somebody. So if you can come up with a catchy spun name, that will help you actually get your blog and be able to get all the .coms. Like we are NoDirectionPodcast.com instead of just NoDirection.com, because somebody got to NoDirection.com before us.
Yep.
And as far as getting readers, first of all, I do believe that the cream rises. So if you are putting out quality content, it will eventually, once people notice it, then it will start to spread. People do like to point out things that they're enjoying. If it's particularly good, they will quote you, or they will at least say, I read on this blog. And if people inquire, maybe it'll eventually lead back to you. But it's also important that you are active in other communities, not necessarily to start spamming in those communities when you have new content out. Most online communities even have restrictions on just how much you can redirect people to your website. But you are basically building your name as, I know it sounds obnoxious, but you're building yourself as a brand. And so whenever I'm posting, people also connect me with the No Direction Network. They connect me with some stuff I do for Blind Ferret, because Ryan Costello is more than just this guy from Montreal. It's this person that has a platform of things, and I have interests, and I have things. So, like, if today I went out and started a G.I. Joe blog, people would be like, I know that this is something he's passionate about, something that he knows a lot about, and people would already know a little bit what to expect and be invested. And so, like, people would funnel to that. So it's important that don't just kind of be a wallflower blogger. You actually have to be engaged in a community if you expect people to come and engage with you.
You're going to have to put your time in purgatory, too. You're going to be writing a whole lot of blogs with single-digit readers before you quote-unquote make it. Another example, another bit of advice I would give to you if you really want to do this is at least 3 blogs a week if you're serious about doing this professionally. Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a common release schedule for blogs. If that works for you, that's a really accepted one. Also, after you get your blog going, start offering, like, start doing writing, start trying to get your start taking freelance gigs for other blogs in related areas of expertise you have, so that you can start establishing your name as something that matters. Smaller blogs, you often hire writers and like work your way up the ladder as if you were doing this for any sort of freelance. This is actually oddly a lot of the same advice we give for people that want to break into the RPG industry. This sort of also applies. So start working on your own blog to prove to yourself first, and then to others that you can consistently release quality content. Then try to get published on more established platforms, and then as you get yourself more established, that means that it will link back to your personal projects, will start to rise in prominence, and it's a nice little feedback loop of awesomeness.
And Luis, I know I introduced you as like this man who stepped out of the shadows, but that's of course not true. You managed to establish yourself and your name. Is there any advice you have for building audiences and building a name?
In terms of blogs, there are plenty of times when I would have an idea, which spawned another idea, which spawned another idea. And you could take advantage of that with a lot of current platforms, in that if you have your first article and then come up with an idea for your next article and whatnot, just write those and schedule them out in advance, rather than wait till, oh, well, this doesn't come out till Friday, so I'll write it Thursday night or whatever the case might be. If you have it now, just write it, schedule it out, and potentially you could even get things set up in such a way where you have plenty of content ready to go and it's just scheduled, which in turn makes it easier for you later on to slot things in or not worry if you have to miss a day or anything, because you have something ready to go. And you can do that same thing with your social media presence. That's actually one thing I do with our Twitter for No Direction, is I use this site called Hootsuite, which lets me just grab links that I know of and schedule them out in advance. So when you see the Twitter updates that say we're going live in an hour or in 5 minutes or whatever the case might be, those are scheduled out well in advance, because I know exactly what time those need to go. And I can do that with articles that are there early, or wake up in the morning and see the new articles on the blog and just have those ready to go for later on in the day. So you can have a lot of the work ready to go in advance to make it easier for yourself later in the day or down the week or whatever the case might be.
I don't want to say this next part to discourage anybody, but I just want everybody to realize that to make a blog or to be a podcaster or to break into RPG writing, these are all things that a lot of people like to imagine themselves being, or they're aspiring writers, they're aspiring game designers, they're aspiring media personalities. This gig, guys, is a lot of work. Right, Ryan?
Just refer back to our earlier conversation about how often we hang out at Gen Con.
Right. This is a lot of hours. This is not always fun. This is a lot of effort. And you have to be motivated to keep hitting the deadline, to keep hitting, and not let the excuses be the reason you don't get anything done. And it is very, very easy to fall into that trap. And a lot of people like to think of themselves as writers, as designers. Very few people can actually suffer through it and work through that time in purgatory and get those early discouragements and then push through them and get it done. So before you put a lot of money into this, before you make any drastic decisions that's going to affect your life, make sure you're ready to really do it. And I really don't want to discourage anybody from doing it, but I really want to discourage anybody from half doing it, or starting and failing and just not being prepared for what they're going into.
We have 2 more questions. Baron, we have time for those, right?
Sure.
All right. Shannon Vicheta asks, what miniatures or other game accessories are you enjoying lately? Have you tried painting any of the Pathfinder deep cuts or painted anything cool?
Ooh, gosh, I love gaming accessories. I just purchased the Deep Cuts wagon set, and I'm looking forward to painting that really badly because I love that. It's a nice ornate wooden wagon with like the full campsite and the horses. I have recently painted up some lizard men. I am currently working on different sorts of 2.5D terrain, trying to do some tests to see what I like there. With Paizo's releasing the new form of their tiles as squares, as 6-inch squares, that is actually the industry standard right now for print your own tile terrain, because it fits nicely on an 8.5 sheet of paper, is square, and you know, is a useful size. And gosh, what else am I doing? I'm painting Gundams, but that doesn't count. I painted a whole bunch of spaceships for Starfinder, so that was fun. I bought that big old bag of, a lot of the Starfinder people know about this, that $5-7 bag of 144 spaceships that are actually just recast molds from various other board games that have once existed in Memoria. And so that's a real cheap way to get a whole bunch of spaceships, and they paint up fun. I did that, and I am working on a custom GM screen.
Ooh. Do I know about this?
No.
Okay, then. I don't have to feel bad. I'm guessing this is something we'll know about more in the future.
If it ends up being successful, I will turn it into a Craft Wondrous item blog.
Cool.
But I only mentioned it because I was asked what I was working on right now. And I do a lot of these projects, and not all of them make it to a point that I'm willing to slap them all over social media.
And I respect that about you. And I mean that sincerely. You don't want to put something out there until it is ready to be out there, and you have a good eye for when something is ready to share. All right, as far as like I said, I've switched to 100% digital play at this point, so I've got a few Pathfinder Society characters that are in a partially painted state, which I guess if I want to play either of them at PaizoCon, I've got a month to do it. Although, actually, I've got literally 30 days to do it, because Darren Kaldemeyer, our official PaizoCon countdown correspondent, let us know today, both in a blog and in a graphic, that there's 30 days till PaizoCon. But I just realized most of those characters are the ones that I use exclusively with Blind Ferret people, so I wouldn't be doing either. But one of them is a dwarf. She's my dwarf slayer that can cast basically mirror image. She gets all those shadow selves. So I got 4 copies of that miniature, and I'm going to paint one elaborately, and then the other 3 will be like a purple shade, a gray shade, and a black shade. So I'll be able to differentiate her different images. And then I've got Quippy, my Joker gnome, alchemist witch, based on the Joker. I said that. I did order some Pathfinder deep cuts before I ordered that Hero Forge miniature, so I have a couple of them. And of course, I was bound to get them at some point because I have a weird love for transparent plastic, and deep cuts makes liberal use of transparent plastic. So those I will paint when I have a chance to just enjoy painting. But both the ones in that set are casters, and I've already got my Quippy miniature, so I don't know what character they'd be associated with, but I have them.
Now, I have painted deep cuts before, so I can give some experience on that. The deep cuts line paints really, really well. They use a medium gray Vallejo primer on the mini. It's not just it's not like the Reaper bones where they claim you can just paint on the mini and it's the plastic, but they actually pre-primed all of the deep cuts, and that makes all the difference. It is just as good as if you prime these yourself. Honestly, I can't do that good of a layer of prime job myself, even after years and years of experience painting. They paint super easy, the paint goes on really well, and the details on those minis are fantastic. My only advice is the typical advice for any miniatures, is especially here because of all that detail, thin your paints a little bit before you start painting on them so you don't clog up all that really fantastic sharp detail on the minis. And they are probably my favorite miniature line when they are the mini I'm looking for. If you're gonna paint bones, I still recommend priming, but make sure you wash them because they're really bad because they have release mold release on them. And that is intentionally designed to make things not stick to the mini, which is counterproductive when you want paint to stick to the mini. So wash them in soapy water and dry them off before you start painting. I hear that that's fine if you're going to paint on the bare plastic. I still prefer to prime them anyway, because then I have a really nice, cured, good stick for my paint jobs.
He does say what? Excuse me. He does ask what other game accessories are we enjoying lately, and I will point him towards the Tome Show episode that I was just on that was about that very topic. So I don't want to repeat that content there. If you want, you can check it out. It's the Tome Show, I believe, 298. Yeah, probably. And just look up the Tome Show, and one of the most recent topics will be about accessories.
Oh, one of my favorite accessories you can buy from Paizo, or you can buy. This is my new favorite thing this year, is the men's valet trays, or quote unquote the Pathfinder collapsible dice tray, which is the same thing, but with the Pathfinder logo on it. These are leather trays with snaps at the corners that they lay flat, and then they can quickly snap into a very functional dice tray. You can get them in a variety of sizes. It keeps the dice from going everywhere, and then they fold instantly flat and go in the bag. There's a Starfinder one and a Pathfinder one you can buy with the branding on. It's a little large, and if you don't want those, or you want something a little smaller, you can purchase these off of Amazon for like $7. And I'm never going to go play without one of these again.
Wow. Finally, we got a question from chat during the episode from the Programmer64. How do you feel about catfolk? He believes that they are, or he or she believes they are criminally underused and under-discussed. All right, so catfolk are officially in Pathfinder. We've seen two different versions of them represented in the art. I don't know if one supersedes the other, or if it's just acknowledging that there's different breeds of cats, so there would be different types of catfolk. Param, do you have any thoughts on catfolk?
The concept of a catfolk fantasy adventurer is super common, and I think that, and the catfolk specifically in the D&D 3/Pathfinder implementation of them are flavorful enough that I think they're interesting. I would use them more if I put any thought to it, and I think that they should be used more. It's a common fantasy trope. It's a lot of potential for roleplay there. A lot of flavor for the race. It's I guess I say race now and ancestry later. When you're playing it, I just know that they're underused and underdiscussed because, unfortunately, there's this anti-furry overtone, especially in the D&D roleplay space. So that's kind of why there's just slightly shied away from. And I think that's a big reason we don't see them everywhere.
Well, I know in Elder Scrolls, there's catfolk. They're kind of more like lynx folk.
Yeah, there's a problem there. Okay, they're really cool catfolk. I like them a lot in the Elder Scrolls, but they're also some unfortunate racial overtones that can be drawn to them. That's probably not very flattering.
I understand if you don't want to go into it. I didn't pick up on them, but I do know that they're definitely not portrayed as trustworthy most of the time. I know that, like, mechanically catfolk are interesting. In fact, I should like them quite a bit because they've got the sprinter ability, which I always like moving fast. If I have an easy way of getting a character to go faster than most characters of that race, I will happily take it. And catfolk luck is fun, and it plays on the idea of that cats are related to luck. But I cannot think of any catfolk lore. Like, I don't know where they fit into Galarian at all.
Ooh, I can talk about that.
Oh, Luis, go for it.
Luis, help us.
So we've said that the catfolk primarily hail from Garund, and right now, with just the way the Inner Sea is the main focus of most things, we only really cover the northern half of Garund. So I don't know the exact details, but from what I know, there's plenty more catfolk just south off the map where we haven't seen them. So if and when we ever go and cover more of Garund, I'm sure we'll see plenty of catfolk coming in.
Are we getting a blood of house pets?
I think that is not a nice title.
Okay, fair.
There was recently Blood of the Beast, which covered things like Catfolk and Gripply and Kitsune and all those. So if you want some more info for them, you can always look there.
Any other thought on our Catfolk underutilized, underappreciated, under-discussed? Luis, we'll start with you.
I think Catfolk are great, and more people should try to play Catfolk. But I might be biased in that the only Catfolk I've ever seen was a player of mine's Bard, who we affectionately referred to as Mr. Meowmers. Was a great...
Oh, and my title's bad.
Well, it's not implying that you... No, yes.
Go on.
This is more a fun joke with that. And he was a great Bard on a pirate ship, so I thought the Catfolk were great. Mechanically, I like them quite a bit. I also like the variety in how they look, because one, allows different artists to give their own different take on it, but it also allows a player to decide, oh no, I'm more of a thinner kind of almost bordering on anime cat person, or I'm the really big, tough, beefy Thundercat style, when it's still fine. You're still both Catfolk.
It's very important that when you're interacting with your Catfolk, pay attention to where their thumbs are.
Is this a cat joke?
No, it's a D&D joke. Because if you're interacting with a Catfolk and their thumbs are normal, then you're interacting with a Catfolk. If their thumbs are backwards, it's a Rashaska. Run for your life.
Is the name perhaps too on the nose? Like if the Gripply were frog folk, would people be as interested in the Gripply?
It has nothing to do with the name. It almost entirely has to do with the anti-furry biases. I think the only reason you don't see a lot more of them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. We ready to wrap things up?
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for episode 177 of No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Thank you, Luis, for joining us for the entire episode. I hope you didn't feel like we were neglecting you in the second half that you joined us for.
No, it's fine.
All right. Excellent. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, I now am a Paizo developer, so I'm on the boards, and you can find my name there. I'm also on our No Direction blogs every Friday, as I mentioned, with Monsters Physique, making monsters. I'm also on Twitter at Donato Classic. It's DONATO Classic, which I'm sure I can drop a link somewhere. Or, just around on our Discord. I'm there most of the time.
And you mentioned it earlier, but I don't think we've ever officially thanked you for all the work you do on our Twitter. You are the person that runs our Twitter and our social media on that side. So if people are ever adding you, I don't know if you ever reply or if you were mostly just sharing. But yeah, people interacting with the Twitter account are interacting with you.
Yes.
Just, making sure that's officially on the record. Mm-hmm. And people will be able to see you at PaizoCon. Will you be at Gen Con?
To the best of my knowledge, we'll be going to Gen Con, which will be my first time.
Woohoo!
Really?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
I'll see you there.
I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. Param, do you have anything you want to shout out to?
I had something, but I lost it. But one thing I do want to shout out to is how people can keep in touch with us. Of course, you can find us at NoDirectionPodcast.com, our website, where you'll find links to all of our social media, as well as our wonderful Discord server, where you can chat with all of us at the network throughout the week. We are all pretty much very active there. It's a great way to talk with Luis, Ryan, and myself, as well as the rest of the members of the network. And it is also one of the most chill Pathfinder, Starfinder, Paizo communities you will find on the entire internet. Also, make sure you pay attention to our YouTube page at youtube.com/nodirection and our Twitter, which is twitter.com/nodirection. You can also email us at nodirection@hotmail.com. And also, please also give some attention to our fantastic blog content, some of which is written by Luis here. His monsters are awesome. as well as our other shows in our network, No Direction Beyond, our Starfinder podcast that comes out the weeks that No Direction doesn't come out, as well as our new show, No Direction Adventurous, which comes out every single week.
Yeah, the goal is to have it out every Friday morning so that for your Friday morning commute.
We're going to need to work on scheduling because, okay, we need to talk about scheduling. But yeah,
No problem.
Friday, No Direction Adventurous, Fridays, awesome. Enjoy that.
I mentioned earlier that Darren Caldemeyer did a guest blog post today, so I just want to thank him again for that. He's just talking about PaizoCon, why you should be excited about PaizoCon, and we will be at PaizoCon, all three of us that are on the show today. PaizoCon is May 25th to 28th. That is Friday to Monday, although if you get there on Thursday, I recommend it because there's pre-PaizoCon activity at the hotel. The hotel being the Doubletree by Hilton Hotels. It is right by the airport in Seattle. I'm sure that airport has a name. Luis? SeaTac. I thought it might be SeaTac, but I wasn't confident enough to go with it. You can find out more at paizo.com/PaizoCon. I am really looking forward to when they release the events, which hopefully will be soon because I want to plan that weekend. Like, I am so excited for that weekend. I want to know everything I'm going to be doing every second of it, which I know is not the way to spend a PaizoCon, but it's what I want to do right now. Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Pam.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.